Right. Like fall is on it. And the thing with our seasons now, it's either spring, summer, or just seemed like a week ago it was 95 degrees. I was that shirt.
Oh, well, it was kind of like the last I just took. Oh, you're talking about, I have to do that for real well,
I do my
How do you try to do that?
well, 2 months.
You can go, let's see. If you go to settings. Oh, really?
It'll be horrible. It's gonna be.
So,
Every day.
I think I'm gonna
No, not another day of sunshine. Shorts that we put on.
So good evening, everyone. Hello, hello. I'm going to call this Joint City Council Planning Commission meeting to order. I will do roll call, and then Joe, if you want to follow, and then we can have Hiller take over after that, if that's all right. I don't know if you can hear me, Hiller. Can you hear me?
I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good deal.
Great.
So I'll go through roll call. Councilman Owens.
Yeah.
Councilman McGoffin just walked in the door. He's here.
He's here.
Councilwoman Diamond. Here. Councilman Burns.
Here.
Councilwoman Kesty. Here. Councilman Allen.
Here.
And Councilman Lavaca.
Here.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilman, I'm sorry, Commissioner Cock. Here. Commissioner Freiberger. Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Burnett. Here. Commissioner Huggins, absent. Commissioner Maddox. Here. Commissioner Patizzi, present. Thank you.
All right. Hiller, welcome. Are you going to be leading off talking about the summary of the grant?
Yes, I am, Mayor. Thank you. I wanted to begin by introducing myself to those of you that I haven't yet met. My name's Hiller West. I'm your interim community development director, pending the results of a search and hiring of a permanent employee for this position. I've been with you for about a month, and much of my time has been dedicated to learning about and talking to the State Department of Commerce about 3 grant opportunities, which I wanted to inform you, Mayor, council members, and planning commissioners about. 2 of those grant opportunities relate to work that the city will have to do as a result of some legislation that was passed in the last session, as well as requirements of the State Growth Management Act, which, as you know, was initially adopted in 1990. The third grant does not relate to work which the city has to do, and in fact, the city is not included in the list of counties and cities that need to do that work, and I'll go into that in more detail. Let me say, please stop me if at any point you like to ask a question or just didn't understand what I had just said. So there are 3 grant opportunities. The first one, they will all impact the city's work program. And the first one I'd like to talk about is for updating the city's comprehensive plan and development regulations, municipal code, to address climate change, There are two aspects to this grant. One is the amendment of policies and regulations in the city's governing documents. And the other aspect has to do with implementing actions that are actions on the ground that the city can take to facilitate a response to climate change. An example of an activity, an implementing activity, would be locating and enabling electric vehicle charging stations within the city of Sedro-Woolley. The amount of funds that are available under this grant are actually statewide over $30 million. And for the city of Sedro-Woolley specifically, could amount to up to $500,000, depending on what the city takes on in the way of a work program. If the city includes certain implementing activities for which the deadline is the year 2029, the funding could add up to $500,000. If, on the other hand, it's a more limited work program, more likely the funding would equal about $150,000 or so. The application for this grant is October 31st. So it's not very far away from now. The second grant is for the updating of the city's comprehensive plan. And this is a periodic update that's required under state law, under Growth Management Act. Not all of the cities and counties are on exactly the same deadline. Some of the larger counties and cities that are immediately in the Seattle metro, King County metro area have a 2024 deadline for this work. Then those counties and cities within them that are just to the north and south of that King County, Seattle metro area, and that includes Sedro-Woolley and Skagit County, have a 2025 deadline. And then other counties and cities that are further away and smaller have an even longer deadline than that. And we have been notified by the Department of Commerce, the Growth Management Division, that the funding available under this grant to Sedro-Woolley would be $125,000. Now, the grant, as well as the climate grant, this grant as well as the climate grant, are deliverables-based grants. That means that the funding is not based on how many hours a particular consulting firm spent on the project, or how many hours of staff time was provided as math, for example, which is typical for a lot of grants. Instead, it's based on deliverables. When deliverables are provided to the state provides a certain amount of funding back. And that's something that's very important to keep in mind. The application for this grant is also October 31st. Finally, the third grant, which is something I mentioned earlier, that the city is not required to do under recent legislation, is the adoption of new regulations to address what is called middle housing. The term middle housing is defined as a category of housing that includes attached units up to 6 plexes. So duplexes, triplexes, 4plexes, up to 6 plexes are all called middle housing. And because the city of Sedro-Woolley is located in a county that's under 250,000 in population, it's not subject to the requirements of this legislation. In a recent meeting with the Department of Commerce, disclosed that there's a relatively small amount of funds available for this project, and the city of Sedro-Woolley would be in a second priority list for funding. So this is definitely not a high priority grant to go after, but the first two are. With that, I think I'll pause and ask. Well, let me just say one more thing. All of these tasks will entail significant time and work by staff, planning commission, and city council. It will be necessary to search for and contract with one or more consulting firms to provide assistance over the next 2 years. Formation of one or more citizen advisory committees is very likely and is strongly advised by the Department of Commerce, which is the granting agency for these grants. So with that, I'll stop and ask if there are any questions.
Madam Mayor, I got a question for
Yes,
Mr.
yes,
West.
go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Mr. West. Wonderful to meet you. We read your resume and it was really nice, and thank you for stepping in too. Much
Thank you.
appreciated. You said the first one was updating the comp plan, but then you said the second one was updating the comp plan as well. Is the first one a climate change grant standalone? How does that relate to the comp plan?
It is, the first one is an amendment to the comp plan because it would entail adoption of a climate element to the comp plan. So you know how the comp plan has a variety of elements in it, land use, transportation, capital facilities, shoreline, all those different elements. Well, it would be the addition of a climate element, and that climate element would have policies and regulations addressing the city's response to climate change. And then over and above that, there would be the implementing activities or the implementing actions which the city would take.
And that's coming from the State Chamber of Commerce, or is it coming from the city to amend our own plan?
Well, it would be the city. The whole growth management process is supposed to be a bottoms-up process, and that means that it's initiated at the local level, and then when the locals are done with the work that they need to do, then it's transmitted up to the state for review and vetting by the Department of Commerce and other state agencies that work with the Department of Commerce. So the work is initiated and programmed at the local level before it's sent to the state.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm more inclined to, like, especially without charging stations, like free market business, inclined to see that. We never subsidize gas stations. I think Elon Musk made that point a while back. And if we're going to see that technology grow, we're going to hope that businesses do it, not taxpayers do it. So grant is still from taxpayer money. That's kind of my own leading on that one. But thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Patisi?
Hey, hi, Hillary. Great to meet you again. Hey, a quick question on that second grant regarding a comprehensive plan update deliverables. What are they actually talking about as far as deliverables that we're not doing now? I mean, we're really clear on the different components of our comp plan. But specifically when they're saying deliverables based, is that something that, let's say if we wanted to do a further evaluation of something, we talked about this a couple of years ago, like a tree inventory as part of one piece of the comp plan. Is that what they're talking about, or are we talking about something structural? What would be an example? You gave a great example on the work programs, like identifying EV charging stations or whatever that is. What would be an example of something that we could use funding on that second grant level?
Well, the second grant is for the periodic updating of the city's comprehensive plan and development regulations. So it's more of a policy and regulatory effort than the climate grant would be. Under the GMA, the Growth Management Act, the city is required to periodically, every 7 to 10 years, review its comprehensive plan, and that means all of the different elements of the comprehensive plan must be reviewed and brought up to date with the current population trends, with land capacity and building capacity trends, and statistics, the new capital projects that are in the 6-year capital facilities plan must be included. Any new shoreline related policies and regulations need to be included. All of the elements of the comprehensive plan must be brought into the present for the next succeeding period of the comprehensive plan. So it's more of a policy-based effort because the comprehensive plan is a policy document, whereas there are implementing actions that take place, particularly in the capital facilities element, which is the list of capital projects that the city has decided to do over the next 6-year or further period of time. The majority of the plan is a policy-based document. But along with that, the regulations which implement that policy-based document, which are in the municipal code, those regulations need to be updated as well. So for example, the zoning code, which is the implementing document for your land use element and the comprehensive plan, needs to be updated to provide the densities, minimum parcel sizes, uses, and so forth that will enable the vision that is in the comprehensive plan. And as you have become aware, there are trends region-wide having to do with densities and housing types and housing demand that will have an impact on the comprehensive plan as it's updated.
You know, we do all of this anyway. So my question is, how do we get $125,000 for something that we do continually? So that's my question. This is something that we were going to start in the really near future, and this isn't anything new around here. We have some great staff that puts together some amazing numbers. How do we capitalize on that $125,000? That's my question. This is stuff that we do normally.
Understood.
So how would we write up something like that to be able to?
What we will probably find, unless Sedro-Woolley is in a very unique category of its own, that the work that goes into updating the comprehensive plan will take quite a bit of technical and expertise help to do. So we will almost certainly, I should say certainly, have to go out and contract with a consulting firm, and that consulting firm will then provide a lot of that technical expertise, and as well as just the day-to-day work that's needed to update the comprehensive plan. And it's, I'd be very surprised if that contract for consulting help ran under 100,000. Let me put it that way. I remember working on an update to a comprehensive plan for a town of 5,000 in Pierce County about 28 years ago. And at that time, the contract for the comprehensive plan update was in excess of $300,000. And it was for that community. So now that entailed a lot of budget work to get that document done. But I just want to let you know that consulting help is likely to absorb most of that grant amount. And in fact, that's what the state is counting on. They know that most of the budget that is put towards this effort is going to be going to consultants and technical help.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question for you is about the Commerce Climate Grant. So are those funds just for the changes to or updates to the comp plan, or would any of that be able to go towards actual implementation?
I know Commerce has been pretty clear that some of that money can go towards implementation. And in fact, the deadline for the implementation part of the grant is the year 2029. Mm-hmm. So I gave the example of locating and enabling electric vehicle charging stations within the city. If, for example, that would be part of the program, then there would be the initial assessment and analysis of where in the city charging stations could be located, given the infrastructure that exists in the city and where it makes logical sense to put charging stations, and then actually preparing to locate the charging stations. Now, what's not entirely clear yet is whether some of the money would be used or could be used towards the infrastructure itself. My initial best guess on that is that it's probably not intended for the actual infrastructure itself, because that, I mean, you can run out of money very quickly if you're actually buying electric vehicle charging stations and putting them on the ground. But I think the analysis, all of it would be paid for by the grant.
Okay, that was my guess, judging from the numbers as well. I was just wondering if flood mitigation, things like that could be included. And I know we'd already applied for grants, if I remember correctly, for charging stations we put in our city. So if they want to pay us to add that to the comp plan, then I guess that's not a terrible idea. But I just wasn't sure if that was in any way included for implementation. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's just an example of an implementation project that we could include in the application. It does grab your attention because it's a kind of a very direct, meaty type of project that is sure to get support at the state level if we were to include it as part of our funding proposal, but it's not a required project.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Paul.
Mr. West, I had a question. Well, in that case, would the city contract with somebody on these charging stations? Is that how it would work?
I think we likely would. I think the city would put out a request for proposals, or RFP as they're called, for a company with the expertise to provide the whole technical analysis for where electric vehicle charging stations can be located, what kind of infrastructure they require, and where will they be allowed to be located by the state, and so forth. I mean, there's a whole body of analysis that goes with electric charging stations, and we would contract with a firm that would provide that kind of assistance. Now, the good news is that the grant is intended to reimburse for those types of costs.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. West, if it's possible, because I don't know, I'm guessing you've had the opportunity to kind of read through what the state has laid out for the cities.
Yes.
And so because the planning commission is here, is there a possibility you can do perhaps within a couple sentences, kind of lay out how complex this is really going to be? This is not going to be our straightforward comprehensive plan. There's things that have additions and requirements that are going to be put into place that are far more, for lack of a better word, comprehensive than what we're doing now. Could you maybe give an example or explain the depth and the breadth of this project? Because it's huge, it's massive.
Well, yeah, I could kind of map it out for you at this time. I think a lot of the detail is yet to be fleshed out between the state and the city, and that's just to some extent part of the whole contract process that we would be entering into with the Department of Commerce, would be to flush out that kind of detail. But from the standpoint of mapping out how this would take place, is I think what I foresee and what the state foresees is that initially there would be an advisory committee that would be created that would bring in people from various interests, various levels of knowledge and expertise in the community, as well as, and this is really emphasized this year by the state, as well as people from underrepresented communities that may be impacted by whatever the city does in the way of climate preparedness. So there'd be an advisory committee that would be formed, and then that advisory committee, working with staff, would put together an initial kind of a list of what we would be looking for in the way of policy changes and implementing activities that would be our climate element, what that climate element would include. And in order to make that happen, we would, together with the advisory committee, the staff would develop a request for proposals that would then be distributed widely among companies and firms with expertise that would be interested in responding. The way that used to be done is to advertise in the Seattle Daily Journal of Commerce, for example, to get the word out that the city of Sedro-Woolley is looking for one or more companies with expertise that can provide assistance in preparing a new climate element for the comprehensive plan. Now, in the online age, we would distribute that probably online to as widely as possible, as well as on the city's website. And hopefully, as a result of that, we would generate responses by a number of different consulting firms that would put out their proposal on how they have the background and expertise to provide this kind of service for the city. And that is best demonstrated by past experience working with other jurisdictions in preparing these kinds of climate policies and climate elements. The city of Shoreline, for example, which is as you probably know, one of the suburban cities to Seattle, developed a climate response plan over 10 years ago. There are some cities in the metro area that have been doing this already for quite a bit of time. So we will hopefully get responses from companies with expertise that can demonstrate that they're able to do the job. And then those responses would be brought back to the advisory committee, planning commission, city council for review, and then selecting a specific number for interview. The city would then interview those firms and make a decision as to which one or ones you would like to hire to then work with the advisory committee and the planning commission and staff to prepare a draft of the climate element. And as the project moves forward, there would be times when the work is brought back to planning commission, city council for an update, comment, kind of a check-in type of process that occurs periodically during the project, so that when we finally get to a draft, it's really not a big surprise to anyone. I mean, everybody will have participated and become aware of what's in the draft and is ready to put it out for public comment. And so there's a whole public comment process that needs to take place. And there's an environmental review process which needs to take place under SEPA, the State Environmental Policy Act. And so that would happen, and then that draft is brought back for further work, and then hopefully to a conclusion. So we're probably looking at 2 years for this work, if not a little bit more.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Just one.
Yes, go ahead.
Ellen had his hand up too.
All right.
No, it's okay.
This climate change, I understand it's a requirement that we deal with this.
It is by the legislature, House Bill 1110, that required it.
So whether we get the funding or not, we're still doing it, right?
We are, but I think the funding is such a big piece of it that our argument to the state would have to be that if there's no funding, it's just not very feasible for the city to do much of this work. And so I think the state realizes that funding just comes with it. Without funding, there's not much that's going to get done.
Just a quick one. So it's not a required element, right? The comp plan has certain elements that are required, bottom line. So the climate change element is a new element. However, it's not a mandatory one.
It's a new element that is now required by the new legislation that was adopted. It wasn't one of the required elements under the 1990 Growth Management Act, and it hasn't been until now a required element.
Okay, so it is required.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would. I'm personally getting older, and I'm only on the council for another 4 months. I'm totally sickened by this proposal. I think it's totally out of whack. It's mandated by the state that we all walk in lockstep. So what is the funding we're after to give to consultants Is that basically what we're asking, is give us $150,000 and we'll pay somebody else with it?
$500,000.
Or up to 500,000 or 150,000? Okay, that's my question.
Well, I think our message to the state would be that, again, without funding, it'll be very difficult to do any of this work. And so we are prepared to comply with the state requirements, but we do need the funding. And the majority of that funding would go towards recovering city costs, whether they be getting consultant assistance or they be internal costs, supplies, staffing, whatever it may be, but the city needs to recover those costs, and that's what the grant funding would be for.
Okay, so complying with the state is walking in lockstep with them, right?
Well, I'm not sure I would describe it quite that way.
Well, I will.
Yeah, but I mean, your basic point is if the legislation requires the city to do the work, yes, I mean, the city has to do the work.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
I just had a question about the consultants. Has anyone like surveyed to see how many are available? Like if every city in the state needs to do this and it's going to require a consultant, do we even have capacity statewide to handle? Like, is it one of those things where if we make a decision early on, that we'll have a better chance of actually finding a consultant? Or if we wait too long, that we're going to be stuck without anyone available?
Well, that's a very good question. And it's one that I've asked myself, and I mentioned it to our city administrator in some conversation. There is going to be a really huge need for consultant help and expertise to get this work done. And how many firms are out there that can help the cities and counties throughout the state do this work? That's a good question. I think the sooner that we get started, the better. But of course, there will be a lot of cities and counties that will be at the starting gate at about the same time, because they'll be getting their contracts approved by the state, their funding approved by the state, and then they will be moving towards issuing some requests for proposals. And so it's probably inevitable that a lot of cities and counties will be doing this at about the same time.
I can say, just so everybody's aware, when we met with Commerce and they were going over all that needs to happen, which was, it took our breath away. Commissioner Janicki did suggest the possibility, and although we haven't agreed to do this yet, we're going to have conversation regarding it, that we actually pool our funds and we hire a consultant who can do the work for all of the cities. So that's one thing that we're talking about doing. That was a suggestion that she made. And I think it's a good suggestion, and I think it would actually be smart to do it, but we'll see what happens. But just so you're aware, Mr. West, because obviously you'll likely be involved in some of this.
Yes, that's a good point, Mayor. In fact, there was an outreach to Skagit County just recently to see if they are considering or interested in doing any kind of a joint project. And there hasn't been a response yet from them.
All right, thank you. Yes.
So not being familiar with the legislation itself, but kind of understanding the breadth and the concept, you know, it being another edict from the state down to the cities to do this, what is the enforcement mechanism? Like if we don't properly implement a climate change element into our comp plan, like what is the deadlines? I mean, obviously it's going to be a very lengthy and detailed process. Like is there deadlines for this to be achieved? And then what is the enforcement if we don't comply fully, or if we don't meet any certain deadlines? Like what does the state hold against us? Is it withholding additional funding?
The enforcement is mainly in continuing to qualify, the city continuing to qualify for certain types of state grants and loans. In the past, the state has pursued enforcement through negotiating with cities and counties regarding their access to, for example, TIB funding, transportation improvement grants and loans, capital grants, and there's also enforcement through what are called sanctions. But those the state has been very reluctant to impose sanctions on cities and counties because it's such a, well, it's such a heavy weapon to use. Chelan County was involved in some negotiation with the state about sanctions for some time, but I'm not aware of any other city or county that has actually suffered from state sanctions for not doing the work. But the city could be found to be out of compliance, and then in regards to getting funding for transportation loans and grants, that is very possible. And the city could also be taken to court, the Growth Management Hearings Board, and then ultimately to court for being out of compliance with the mandated growth management requirements. And that isn't somewhere where Sedro-Woolley wants to be.
So with a municipality like Woolley that relies heavily on TIP grants for a lot of our transportation projects, which are lengthy and constant, by not being in compliance, this could render us pretty much,
yes,
in a standstill with almost all of those projects.
It could have a negative impact on funding for those. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So you were saying that there is about 30 million in the pool for this grant?
For the climate funding, yeah.
And the maximum payout was 500,000 per city?
500,000 for the city, for a city our size is the maximum. Yeah.
So that would cover like 60 cities statewide. And I just wanted to be clear, got off that conversation, if that pool ran out and we didn't get the funds, you had mentioned something about that we could write to the state that we didn't have the funds available. Is there some sort of process where we can, if we don't get the funding or the grant, that we could do like some of the work and use that other justification as the reason why we couldn't finish it, and that would be acceptable, or would we still be liable?
Yeah, I think that would be a good approach, would be to do some of the work so that the argument to the state would be, we're showing willingness and some capability to get work done, but if the funding doesn't come through, we couldn't do the rest. But I should also point out that I've been told by the Department of Commerce that the funding is there, and they are see themselves as being more of a pass-through agency on this money. They are really looking to get the money out, to use their words. So they want to get the money to the cities and counties and get the cities and counties started on the work. So I do think it's likely the city will have a positive response from the Department of Commerce, but we need to dot the I's and cross the T's to get it.
And to clarify, you said it's deliverables. So
right.
Once we do a certain amount of work, we check the box, we send it in, and they then will refund us for what we have put out, correct?
Yes, they provide, I think under state law, we are limited to 1/2 of the funding this fiscal year and another half of the funding the following fiscal year.
So a lot of work needs to be done within a year's time to make sure that we acquire and redeem that first half of the funding.
Right.
Yes.
Mr. West, what do you think the full financial impact on the citizens is going to be? You said it's 300,000, 22 years ago for a city of 5,000 for a basic comprehensive plan update. And we're looking at adding, as you know, climate studies can be pretty extensive. So it's not $500,000 this is going to cost. So over 10 years, how much are taxes going to be raised? What additional costs are going to be in there that we're not talking about?
I think a lot of that is an open question right now. How much of an investment? Yeah, I wish I had all the answers for you on that, but I really don't.
It just seems like we're getting like almost blackmailed into doing this. Like we don't do our this, then we will lose these grants for the roads. It doesn't sound right in the way, I mean, we should have a lot more leeway on something this big for something like that. Do we have any interest in writing back to and hearing back from maybe Senator Wagner or Representative Elslick or Representative Lowe on this and seeing how, I mean, they represent our county, see how they feel about this? This has put every city in the county in a pretty big way. And our city is 12,000. That's an enormous cost that is unknown that we could be placing onto our citizens once we endeavor into this, versus trying to say, hey, let's do this in a reasonable amount of time if this is what's required, but be legalistic about it and find out what are the loopholes and then what are we required to do at what time, like you suggested. There is what are the timelines? Is it 5 years before we have to turn in the first document? In which case, when does that start?
Well, the deadline for the policy document, the climate element, is the same deadline we have for the updating of the comprehensive plan, which is June 2025. So
they incorporated this like 2 years ago and then asked us to do all this work within, or they incorporated it this year in this session and then asked us to do all this work within 2 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would give us legal basis to say, well, even what you're asking for is unfeasible to put on to our taxpayers, the citizens of this community.
Well, I would certainly encourage you to contact your state representatives and have them, get their take on it, get their opinion on it. You bet.
You're spot on. The mayors have already started talking about that. Yeah.
Quick comment, the way this works, let's not knee-jerk to this because there's no studies required. It just means it needs to be another element. It has policies. We always look at other jurisdictions that have already done it. So there's nothing here that says, hey, you got to hire this consulting firm and walk around and find every single EV station. That's not this. The comp plan just says, hey, this is the structure, looking forward. It does not require, from what I can tell right now, that you need to go out and hire all these consulting firms. So let's get our arms around it first before we start figuring any costs on anything.
I think that, like you're saying, but with the comp plan, it is a guideline of how we're working.
Right, yeah.
So once it's in the comp plan, and we've heard that comp plan is kind of suggestive, the council runs it, but then we march to the comp plan as that's our barking order. It's the only way we can do it. So we want to be sensitive when we build that out and put that in there. Yeah.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
We're all going to be looking at this in detail. I'm just saying, I don't want to get crazy about it right now because it's coming to us. And we will absolutely take a good look at it. And not for anything. We're a get it done kind of group. Yeah. So we already have ideas of, just saying Nicole got Shoreline, we're looking at Bellingham as well.
And we're interested in seeing that at the council.
Somebody else has done this before. Let's check it out.
Sorry, what kind of cost would be one?
I was just going to point out, I think there was a good point just made about relying on what other jurisdictions are doing as well. We're very much going to be looking at what other cities of about our size are doing, and taking what works and adding it to what we have. It's something all cities and counties do. There's no need to go out and reinvent the wheel. If there's a city out there that is putting together some good information and good policies that we could just tweak and adopt in our own climate element, by all means, yes.
Go ahead.
So setting aside the implementation, just curiosity for the October 31st deadline, for you to put together a grant proposal. That way we find out if we even qualify or get funds for this. What kind of cost are we looking at to have you do that?
Well, I might direct that to our city administrator. I think there's the work that I would be doing on it, and then Charlie may have something to add.
Yeah, we'll have Hiller fully engaged in it full time. He's our interim director, so up to full, as much as we can get his time, but we'll put enough time into it with them. He's not totally full time, but much as we need. And then we'll engage other staff as needed to make sure we get it over the finish line. I don't have a hard and fast answer on how much time it will take, but the nature of the comp plan update is it's got to be front of mind, right? It takes effort and it's got a deadline. So we'll make sure we get it done.
My thought in asking the question being that regardless of what we end up doing, or if the state changes it, if our representatives are able to get us any kind of reprieve here, at least we're making the effort to save the citizens the money for what this is going to cost, because we might not be able to control what the legislator does. But right now we have an option to save a little money on doing something they're going to force us to do. My thought on it.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. West or any other thoughts? Hiller, thank you. That was very informative, and greatly appreciate your knowledge. I know you worked, I think you helped work on the plan when it came together in 1990, didn't you? Weren't you part of that board? And
Yes.
yeah, so that's a real benefit for us here in Sedro-Woolley. So very glad to have you on board.
Well, thank you very much for those comments, Mayor.
Well, thank you. And if there's nothing else, we'll move on to item number 2, which is the topics of upcoming planning commission consideration. And Nicole, did you want to lead this discussion?
Yeah, so there's been a few items that have come across my table really, just wanted to bring up for future topics of discussion. So one of the big ones that's come about lately is tiny home communities. I keep getting asked questions at the counter constantly. Is this something that we allow? And right now, no, we have no regulations in our city code for that sort of thing. We had a particular group, Family Promise, that was looking at, they've got the, kind of which church it is. They've got
Methodist?
yeah, the Methodist church. They've got a small portion of property at the back that they're looking at creating a tiny home community back there. I believe and this would be something that we would have to look at, kind of differentiating between park models and actual tiny homes. Park models being more of a mobile, move them sort of thing, and then tiny homes being an actual permanent structure. But looking at doing park models, they'd each have their own kind of lot situation. Their idea is to have it as part of their program. So it's something to where, they have a multi-step program. These people come in and they help them get their housing that they need. At first, residing in the church. If they move up in the program and they're doing well, then they would be able to lease out one of those park models, kind of give them a chance to get their foot in the door, like what home ownership may be like in the future. If they do well in that step, then moving forward to actual ownership of the tiny home permanent structure, something that would be their home. So it was a cool idea, but we kind of chatted with them. We have no regulations right now, so that was something I wanted to bring up, if that was something you wanted me to kind of look into, do more research, and bring to planning commission kind of a draft, code update. And see, because the idea right now, for just having done a little bit of my own research, is having that be kind of a conditional use permit type of thing. We'd allow them in residential zones on a case-by-case basis. I'd have to look into what those minimum lot sizes would be, setbacks, and density regulations and things like that. It's a lot to look into, but one of the items. We wanted, I don't know if you want me to go through the list of things I've got here, or if you want to do a discussion on that first item, and then I can move on.
Does anybody have any comments or questions? Yes.
So we already have the DADU and ADU code already on the books. The thing with tiny homes are nothing but detached ADUs. They're in that same 250 square feet to 800 square feet, whatever it is. But it's still the same requirements. You still need sewer, you still need water, you still need parking, you still need all these components that we already have on the books. So it's just that in the area, in the zone where the churches are at, it's not zoned for this particular aspect of our code. But I don't want to reinvent the wheel because we already spent a lot of time on this stuff anyway, from setbacks and everything else. So I would say, yeah, well, somebody's coming up and saying, hey, this is what I want to do, whatever. It still needs to comply with what we have right now for safety reasons. If anything, I mean, you still need police, fire. Okay, so you get a 911 call. What are you going to send it to? DADU number 3. So everything needs to be numbered and organized. But we already have a decent code on the books that even, address it. It's just not in that particular zone. And that's the question for you guys. Do you want to allow that use in that zone? Because that's a totally different change. How much parking are you taking away from the church? So there's different guidelines and different requirements, just even on the size of the church. It's a slippery slope. I get it, but we do have code on the books right now.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question here because you kind of brought it up. If it's on a church property and they build tiny houses, will they be taxed?
That's another good one. Yeah.
Or are they going to be tax exempt?
Capital improvement, but probably tax exempt.
Well, there's people living there now. It's not a church parking lot.
Well, but they're not permanent. These would not be permanent homes, correct?
Tiny homes are pretty permanent,
No,
aren't
I
they?
think but family promise isn't, there is a distinction because family promise is talking about basically keeping them on wheels so that they are not.
Well, I'm not trying to punish them. It's
No,
just like, this is,
We'll have
this
to
is
look at-
protecting taxpayers and if you have a mobile home park, they collect tax.
If they're on wheels, that would be a mobile home. See, the tiny homes actually have little pads and they don't have wheels on them. I'm working with a company right now doing exactly this. I have a project in Marysville that we want to do the same thing. So what they did with their code, they said, hey, wait a second, we'll let you do it. Their comp plan gets updated in 2025. We'll address that then. Because House Bill 1037 is the one that deals with DADUs and ADUs versus 11 and 10, which was middle housing, right? So now, including us, well, I think we're not going to be impacted. Here's why: our population is too low. Okay, we're under 25,000. So I think we're still able to keep one detached dwelling unit, not two, like some of the other jurisdictions need to go to. But some like Marysville, they're kicking out to 2025. They're saying, okay, if it's an R6.5 zone right now, that's the density that's going to apply. I don't care what the size of the house is, because it is permanent versus something on wheels that's a mobile home.
Is this something that's going to apply just to that church, or is this something that we're asking for within the comp plan that somebody who owns a lot could then take that, intention and actually turn it into?
Exactly. This would be something, I don't want to base regulations just off of one project idea.
It should be citywide.
It should be citywide.
Yeah.
I want to think about all the avenues that someone can take with this, which is going to be a lot of thought on my end, but park models, the size of the property we're talking about, where is it? All these different.
We could talk about temporary encampments too.
I think, didn't we pass something on temporary encampments recently too? For that, because it was coming down the pike and there was request if there we can do encampments at church parking lots.
We did, we actually
Yeah.
put it in the code, yeah. That's when you ran into the Anacortes. We jumped on it right away, yeah. So we have code on it, right? And they're temporary.
But I'd like to see what it looks like in the end, not end result, but just some more data on what size, how big, how dense, what that's gonna look like for egress, ingress, and safety purposes on first responders.
I mean, I'd like to see that model come to fruition too. Like, I know that that's a bottleneck in getting people that are homeless into housing. That's something Family Promise has brought to us previously, like, hey, the bottlenecks, there's no supply of houses that's in that price range. So it seems like this is one of their solutions that they're trying to come up. And if we already have something that's a framework, I'd like to try to reuse as much what we
Well,
have.
here's another thing in 1037. So what they did was kind of like a 50-50 kind of thing, where in our code, right, we have it currently set up that if you're going to put a detached ADU or an ADU on top of a garage, it needs to be owner occupied. The state overturned that. However, they said, guess what? Put a dadu in there, we'll let you condominiumize. So in essence, you have two detached ADUs, you can now go to the condominium code, split them up, and sell them as independent units. So that cuts down on the rental work. You know, there's people, like single people, they don't need more than 600-700 feet. So that was like the trade-off in 1037. That depending on when you need to implement it, depends on when you do your comp plan review. So that's something we need to take a look at, to go through that code. It's pretty compliant now. I didn't see anything in there that was weird. And it depends on the city and when the comp plan update happens, and ours is next year. So those are the new things that came in. But the middle housing, like Hiller was mentioning, I didn't see any impacts just due to the population of the city and where our urban growth areas are. They're all rural, so I didn't see anything crazy there.
So is everybody okay with Nicole bringing this before the planning commission and having them take a look at that and bring it to the council? Okay. Good deal. All right, thank you, Nicole.
The next one, John left me with this before he took off. He said, get this in front of planning commission. So, okay. So I'm not sure if this was discussed with you guys before or not, but he would have liked to put some bounds on the commercial space percentage required for the main floor front commercial spaces in the CBD. Right now, there are no regulations around that, so you could put a little 10 by 10 commercial space and the rest be residential, and that would meet the code. But with the central business district being primarily for a business, we kind of want it to be pretty obvious that commercial space be the priority there. So
In the CBD.
In the CBD, yeah. So that would be, so the downtown blue line, there is a requirement for commercial space on the first floor, main floor.
Street facing, correct?
Street facing, yes. And so I think his idea was 50%, something that we could talk more about the specifics of it, but
51%. I mean, that's
51%.
more than.
Yeah, prioritizing. So, but outside of that downtown blue line, you're able to do multifamily without commercial, so I don't think that would apply in those areas, but specifically in the downtown. Another thing.
That apply to the first floor only.
First floor.
Any comments, questions?
Do you have any idea on what we're seeing right now?
There's been a lot of remodels. So what I've seen is people have an original building that's got a good commercial space. You know, I want to put more people in here. So they'll remodel it to something very small commercial space and the rest being residential. Right now, there's nothing you can do to stop And I think it's a lot to do with just how COVID has changed the commercial aspect of things. People just aren't wanting to take on commercial business spaces. So yeah, that's a recent trend I've noticed.
Well, one of the things that I've seen, and I've had a lot of constituents mention to me, is about the fact that we've got all of these, and not necessarily Sedro-Woolley as a whole, but Skagit County as a whole, as we're seeing more apartments go up, and we've got these commercial spaces down below, but these commercial spaces are sitting vacant. And the prices of rent, if you calculate it out, fully cover any sort of mortgage and loan payment that they would have in excess. I mean, I did a calculation on one, and they had that thing paid off in 3 years with zero commercial space down below, and it still sits vacant. It has been up and running and had people in it for over 2 years. So the concern in all of that is that you're bringing in all of these heads, but you're not bringing in any tax base to help bring up the infrastructure that's needed to support it. And so that's a huge concern that I'm seeing and hearing from people as I'm talking to them.
Totally agree there.
Now, that's a market-based question, and I've always wondered about that, because if I have captive audience of 70 apartments in a place,
Right.
why don't I have a bagel shop or a nail salon or anything on these lower floors?
Mm-hmm.
Right, they would eat that up. People don't want to go anyplace. Everything is like right there.
Right.
So I've wondered about that myself. Maybe they have their rates set too high, because you're right, they're already capping out on the residential side. Why are those spaces vacant? They shouldn't be.
Right.
So that's on whoever owns it. I mean, and that is a market-driven thing. So, but I totally agree with you. These spaces should not be empty
No.
with the amount of people right there.
So is council interested in having the planning commission actually take a look at this and bring this forth, the commercial space percentage increasing for street facing buildings in the CBD, bringing it up from 10% to 50%? Yes. Okay. All right, thank you.
And then the last one was just a more cleanup one. So chapter 290 is our administrative provisions chapter in the municipal code. There've been some recent updates that I've noticed just haven't, they don't correspond well with the other chapters that they call out. So for example, I think there was a change John made recently to make zoning variances administrative as opposed to needing a public hearing for them. And then as I was going through chapter 290, which kind of explains the processes for all our different types of permits, that didn't carry over in that chapter. So things like that, I just kind of want to go through 290 and make sure that it's consistent with all of our other chapters too. That was one that I specifically noticed.
Oh, I think that's it needs to be done. I don't think that, yeah. I would love to see that happen. Yeah.
Fine tooth comb, but yeah. Okay, and that's everything recent that's come up. So unless you guys have anything that you want me to bring the planning commission.
Does the council have anything specific you'd like to bring before the planning commission?
We're going to cure global warming. We're going to cure global warming.
I wish I had the answers for that.
Just real quick, because it's, so what about the parklets? What's happening with the park?
Okay, so we've taken this to planning commission, I think that for the third time now. But so just some things with permitting, how we wanted that to look. So as of right now, sidewalk cafes, you can get a right-of-way permit to use the sidewalk permanently for use of the sidewalk cafe. What we're looking at doing is changing it to be, I'd make a specific permit for sidewalk cafes and parklets, check whichever one you want. And you can, on a case-by-case basis, have both, just depending on what's going on in the area, if it's good today. But you would get that permit, and it would be something that you would renew every year. Kind of give it a trial period, so that way if something comes up and we don't like it there for whatever reason, we can say, sorry, but we're not going to reissue this permit to you. And that also gives the chance for when a new business owner comes, business sells off to a new owner, that we ensure that this is kept up to date with the current owner as well. They'd be required to get a new permit.
How do we notify businesses when they need to renew their permits? Do we notify them, or is that on the business owner?
It would be on the business owner. So that was something that I had thought about when Planning Commission brought up that they would like a renewed year on an annual basis permit. How would we go about? Because we don't keep track of when a business sells off. So that would be difficult to enforce.
Go ahead.
Is there value added? I mean, I know financially it probably wouldn't be as much for the Planning Commission, but to come up with some 10-year conceptual artistic drawings. And that's more for the community to kind of see where the city, we can kind of base that off what we're already seeing happen and the commercial zones and things like that. And even have some sort of something on the website or something that says, hey, at this pace, with this direction, this is ideas of what the community could look like in time. And I think that helps people accept changes that are happening, but also see and have more vision and creativity about things that are taking place around them.
I just wonder if we can tap into some of this grant money, especially on that climate change. Here's an example, right? I thought about this. So our mixed commercial zone going up Highway 20, right? You go under the trestle, you're heading eastbound. All that housing along Highway 20, that existed since the 1920s, and the codes changed since. So as long as they stay in that single family residence format, and there's no changes to the interiors, it's in a non-conforming use, but you can't do anything about it. But as time goes on, there's some big lots there, right? So now you're in your mixed commercial. So you can go to a totally different zone and a totally different, pretty much.
Yeah, you'd see like, Big Five, not to say that or whatnot, but different things in different areas. And like, okay, well, here's the morphing of the community or kind of what that looks like in certain areas, because there is commercial zones over there and it's all residential. You see it as that, or industrial zones that are, not up and going, like over by the high school and things like that.
That's a little bit tough because car lots, think about it. That's what you can do in a mixed commercial, and there were a bunch of car lots on Highway 20. So when you mix that stuff up, how would you actually, from a composition standpoint, there's so many different things that you really can do with it. We have a pretty flexible MC zone.
It would be like three different, conceptual, like this isn't actual, but these are conceptuals, maybe car lots along that way, or some, maybe mixed use apartment, business, or maybe just more residential houses, because whichever, but being able to kind of visualize what that looks like in 10 years. And
that's a great idea. I'm just wondering if we can tap into that 500K and use that as part of the grant that we need to model our community, because that is going to be an impact, right? So I'm just looking for funding on something like that. That's a great idea, yeah. I'd love to see something like that. A lot of communities do it. They're the ones with money. That's why we always look to other communities to see what they did. When we did Urban Village mixed use, we went to Bothell. They must have spent $200,000 on their stuff. We were like, yeah, look at this.
This a vision like replica Sedro-Woolley's downtown and show some sidewalk cafes.
well, more on the grand scale, like I see the map over there, more of a 3D modeling where it's like, okay, this is kind of what that looks like, or if we go this direction or this direction. It's not saying that we'll be doing any of that, but citizens would be able to go up and see and like, oh yeah, this, or I like this, or even have a blog suggestion ID on that page.
Even for the developers.
Yeah, it's all private business, so we're not dictating anything. It's just zoned. But
right. I would love to see something interactive where you can just walk in the town hall, go up to the
Yeah.
map on the back, and do this, that, and the other thing, and just.
See your business come together. Like that kayak shop by Pat Shimmer. You know, if that guy can go up there and go, oh, that's what that would look like, and then zoom out, that's what that would look like in the community. And then be able to actually see and entice development in that case. That was good.
Councilman.
I like that idea too, even if you have like your annexations that we've done that we know are gonna be residentials, we could project that. Like the Jones-John Minor Court, or we could show this is what it would look like.
The parks, Homestead Park, the Swift Center Park.
Here's the thing with some of that stuff, just because we have it zoned, okay, like R15 or let's say even an R5 or an R7, you can do a PRD 3 acres or above. Just because it's on the map doesn't mean you could easily do it. I have property up on Beachley, you could put 20 units up there, but the water line, you needed a 12-inch ductile iron line that was over on Township on Highway 9. $235 a linear foot to run it up to the top. So just because it's on the map doesn't mean it's really feasible based upon sanitation, water, power. So there's a whole bunch of other things that could go on and stuff like that.
One of the feedback that I've gotten from the developers has been, for this city, it seems like they have to do a lot of the studies and evaluations and put money into it before they actually get into the process. And they've requested, like, could it be something similar to like Bellingham or some of the cities down south where when they get through the design review?
I don't see that. I see every city required by SEPA and all kinds of things. You need a wetlands delineation. We got critical areas. So these are the things that are just based even on the state code. You have surface water. We have the rezone over on the golf course. You get a lot of water there. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen. We've had this conversation. We've had people here, and I've always said, you can't always get what you want, but you get what you need, right? There are things. I mean, okay, so you have 20 acres, so maybe only 1 acre is developable. We're not going to give you the density on 20 acres. So we have a lot of critical areas in Skagit County. You got salmon, you have all these competing interests that do make it difficult. And we're not bad. Head down to Mount Vernon. I know builders that won't even go down there anymore, simply for the fact that just even on a single family residence, I could look at $50,000 alone just for a permit. So it depends on the jurisdiction. Some are luckier than others, depending on where they're at. Skagit County, we got a lot of agricultural. We got this amazing river. We just got different things here versus Thurston, Cowlitz. The different counties have just different things. You want to get crazy? Go to King County. How about it? So I live in this stuff. That's what I'm saying. And I see all the different jurisdictions because that's one of my main things that I do as a real estate broker is vacant land. I live in code. That's why I looked at different jurisdictions and we do things here because you can see what worked, what really doesn't work, or what just didn't come out as a good product at the end of the day. But our gifts here are our environment, and that's why they really need to be protected. And yeah, it's pretty standard. Wetland delineations, traffic studies, no matter where you go, I don't see any difference in that. And a lot of it's state required, not just us.
So anything else? Does anybody have anything else for the Planning Commission? And then I'm going to toss it back. If you don't, I'm going to toss it back to the Planning Commission. Are there things that you have seen come about that perhaps you would like to propose as a possibility of bringing forward to the City Council?
So I ran into one thing. This is a week ago. I know I'm doing all the talking because I see this stuff on a daily basis. So in a mixed commercial zone, as I mentioned, we have all these single family residences that will stay there for quite some time. I had a situation just recently. He's 41 years old. When he was 3 years old, he had brain cancer and they irradiated the crap out of his brain. Now he's 41. Maybe has 6 months left in his life. So now his parents want to modify his house, okay, that is in a non-conforming use for someone who is clearly not only disabled. So it's something that we might want to take a look at because it's a very, very unique circumstance. Just show the compassion that we have, that we have a non-conforming use because of our zoning change, and there's somebody in there that is truly in need. I'm not talking just a ramp going in, but the house might need to be modified to just be able to move a wheelchair or an extra room for a 24/7 caregiver. I don't think we see a lot of that stuff. Just even having it in there, that if that comes, because this was in the city of Everett, and they were great. Said, hey, this is what's it. Well, you know, it's not. But we'll take a look at it, go right to the express lane, send them pictures of Derek. They got right on it. So it might be something that we might want to consider because it happens so infrequently. But if it does, it's like, okay, you got doctor's notices, you got all this stuff that documents it. Somebody that's going through that kind of situation in their life, I don't know about you, but I've been through it. A lot of us have. So that might be something that we might want to consider to have a little bit of flexibility in areas that are non-conforming for very, very certain and specific types of situations.
So Commissioner Tizzi, did they actually put together policy for that, or did they just make an amendment, write an exception to the?
They basically said, show us your plans, and we'll just make sure that we can get it moving a little bit quicker. So typically a permit process might take 6 to 9 months. We don't think Derek has even 3 to 4 months left. Contractors ready to go, fully permitted, nothing, anything. We just didn't want to be at the back of the pile, move something forward. And then I thought about on mixed commercial in a non-conforming basis with all the single family residences that we have going down Highway 20. And they seem like there's a lot of older individuals that live in these places that if we ever had a situation like that if somebody came to the county, can I do that? It's like, oh, no, I'm sorry, the zone's changed. You're in a non-conforming use. You can't move a wall, this, that, or the other thing. Having a little bit of latitude is based upon that situation. That might not be a bad thing to take a look at.
Well, the reason I asked about that is because going back to what you all have been saying, why reinvent the wheel? If somebody has already laid it out in a way that's very specific, perhaps that could be already, we could have that implemented into.
We look at other jurisdictions all the time. That's on the top of your list, right? We look at that, we're going here. Yeah. Somebody's already done stuff. Some things have changed that they've done good jobs, other things like some stuff.
Right, thank you. Good point. Anything at all? What happened to the tree-lined streets?
I gave up. You know, everybody that talks about Sedro-Woolley says that, oh, they love Dirty Street, oh, they love Talcott Street, and then we build everything with this wide of right-of-ways between the sidewalk and the street. You can't plant a tree that will live. So anyway, I gave up.
So that sounds like that would be an amendment to the code somehow, that if we, for developments, they would have to leave so much room for a tree or something like that.
We just require a larger right-of-way. Developers don't like that because that cuts into how many houses they can put on the lots and so on and so forth. And they rule the world. So you know what do you do? But yeah, I would be happy if every street in Sedro-Woolley was a Talcott or a Ferry Street. That would be awesome. And we wouldn't need a lot of other things if we had that. Kids could play in the right of way. Kids would have bigger front yards. Trucks wouldn't be sticking out over sidewalks when people were home in the evening. There are so many things that would fix, but we just don't do it. So yeah, I'm not going to propose that, but I'd like to see it.
I mean, I would second Commissioner Huggins' points of view. I mean, I would love to see that happen. I think it's part of what the nature and character of Sedro-Woolley is, but there's always pushback from developers, and they want to build on smaller and smaller lots, bigger and bigger homes, and it just isn't there. I don't know how we would systematically push back on that. I mean, this is our city. This isn't developers' cities. This is our city. And what do we want it to look like? So, you know, I would implore that we take greater consideration in what does the beauty of the city look like. It's not just dollars and cents. It's not just money. This is the character of the city.
And it's not just about looks. I'd feel much happier about allowing smaller houses if we had bigger right-of-ways, because then your street right-of-ways become like a park. And then you don't have to have all of the infrastructure in mega parks and stuff like that. You have it right there in front of the house. So you can have it in the house. And like I said, you know, kids can go up and down the sidewalks, go in the speeds on the streets, and it can be a very pleasant environment. And you see it a lot in the Midwest, in the older developments too, because those are the cool neighborhoods that have the nice big shade trees and everything, and so they're solving the heat island problem. They solved it 100 years ago. Yeah. So anyway, it would solve so many problems, but the pushback from developers is that, you know, I can't make it on this many lots because you're taking so much for right of way.
Yeah, but we have a lot of our streets are great. I mean, Talcott, Jameson, Bennett, Ferry, we have really massive right of ways on the side. I mean, I see people plant all kinds of stuff. Maybe we should take a look at the sections that we know are going to undergo additional development moving forward and tighten that stuff up, because we have a lot of great stuff already in place. Let's take a look at the places that you're absolutely right, okay, that are scalable at some particular future point, and double check on what that is. I think right now we're only like, what, 5 feet? Yeah.
For the strip.
Yeah, for the
Like,
strip.
I think they're on
Yeah.
3 strips over on Sock Mountain.
Yeah, they're tiny there. Oh, yeah.
The trees fall over.
Jameson, I would say, because I know it's at least 15 feet.
That was, my question was, were you thinking anywhere where there's a public street right there?
Well, I'm bad on transportation terminology, but not, you know, you wouldn't need them on like alleys, you wouldn't need them on little drives, but I would like to see them something that you can get an actual tree in on regular streets, and yeah, and then obviously a street as big as Ferry or State Street or I think what else. But anyway, those sides, I guess the feeder arterial, they should have it.
Public street standards where you have the requirement for a sidewalk, landscape strip for gutter street situation.
When you get to the 5-lane streets where you have 2 in each direction and then a turn lane or bigger, now you can do it for decoration because nobody's going to walk next to those anyway because they're noisy. Nobody wants to walk that close to it. So you'd have to have a massive right of way or just don't bother. Just do it for those. But smaller strips.
We've been talking about this for years now. I agree with you.
Well, and I just wanted to add too that like we have the ability to push back on developers too, like on the parking for the mixed commercial or mixed AD. I can't remember the name. It's where the 2 buildings are going in right now.
That's UVMU, Orange Village Mixed Use.
Yes. Got it. So for those, like they came back and they said we want to do less parking, and like we collectively said no. Like,
we all said that.
you know, we're going to push back and say you have to do that. So I think we can push back. I don't think that should be a restriction to not do something. I think we absolutely should pursue additional trees and also the spaces, because I've talked to a couple of nurseries and their consistent messages, your guys' like little slot is not going to support the roots, the types of trees that won't blow over in windstorms. And I think everyone loves Tilcott Street. Like from a resident point of view, I would much rather live in a neighborhood that took the time to make the walking areas nicer. I think it adds value to their home too.
And dovetailing with your point, I mean, I think maybe it was Councilman Lavaco who talked about how, you know, the comprehensive plan dictates where we go. So, you know, maybe that's something that we need to look at is how does that fit into our comprehensive plan?
Not in the climate.
Which update is coming up? We're going to be working on that.
Which could with the climate.
So is that okay? They work on that?
Yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah.
coach on that.
I think that's great. Living on Ferry Street, one of the things we, just for consideration purposes, is that as the trees grow, if it's part of city code that these specific trees are planted, who then becomes responsible for these sidewalks when they uproot themselves over time. And when the roots work themselves into the sewer line, and those sorts of things. And so just stuff to think about as you're processing through that, but those are actual realities.
We talked about that, and Mark Freiberger actually made some comments on that. Depends on the types of trees that you grow.
Right.
So there should be specifics as, I mean, you can't get rid of the old stuff that we have in place right now. Alcott's an example of, sidewalks all over the place.
Right.
But as we go forward, having the type of tree that can be planted, because we want trees.
Right,
But we need to be sensitive to the infrastructure, sidewalks, all that stuff, absolutely,
Yeah, because some of them are absolutely beautiful, but then what kind of unintended consequence are we putting on the burden in the community 20 years down the line? What's that actually gonna, looks great right now, what is it gonna look like then? Because ultimately we want those 100-year-old trees to be there, right? They become landmarks. People love to drive through and look at them. But that's just food for thought.
Okay, I live in a 101-year-old house, and I've got an oak tree that would take 3 guys our size to put your arms
They're
around.
beautiful, yeah.
And what am I supposed to do? I'm not gonna cut the son of a gun down. It's over 100 years old. Or right at 100.
Just talking about the new stuff.
Yeah. And it's ripping the sidewalk, it's lifting the sidewalk. That's what they do when they get that big.
Those are grandfathered.
Absolutely grandfathered in. Okay, super. I appreciate that. And I have the old clock downtown, and that's pretty old too, so that's grandfathered in, yeah. Okay. Sorry, a little levity.
Yes,
okay.
very good, thank you. Anything else? Yeah.
One more addition I thought of, looking at North Trail Road between FNS Grade and Jones, they built that road really narrow with, if someone parked a truck on the side of the road, I don't think you'd get a fire truck through there without driving over the sidewalk. It might be a bit of a stretch. And that was something that some of the people in our public safety have brought up to me, was making sure that we have roads that are wide enough. If someone does decide to break law and park there, when a fire truck or EMS show up, they can still get through, because we do have to account for the people who aren't going to follow the rules sometimes. And that is a quite narrow road section, so I'd like to see a minimum put in place.
That would be a public works question, like for Mark Freiberger, because there's a lot of things like going under the trestle there. That was a real issue for a long time. Part of that got widened up a couple of years ago. But access, especially for any type of emergency equipment, is a big deal.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Like that to be something considered.
Yeah. I mean, even like looking at Garden of Eden and Jones, as you come through there with some of the new BYK developments that have gone on there, the 55 and older and that sorts of things. Now, as more traffic is diverted through there, I've had people that live on Garden of Eden and up come down and say that they actually get a little nervous when they hit that spot, because there is not enough room to move in any direction. And especially, there's more people there, so they're walking, there's no sidewalk, there's nothing there. And so as more and more development is coming through there, that road there is no way to change that at this point. We've got ditches and priorly owned properties on either side, and they're stuck. And so if there is an accident, if there is a fire, if something needs to happen, what kind of access is there actually there at this point? And with looking at the reality of further development going in that direction, how is that going to be handled as an access?
The way it actually works, I believe, and Nicole can comment on this, so all the new development is going to be bound to the new code, sidewalks, depending on the density, all that kind of stuff. The problem is when you get to the adjacent properties, right, it is what it is.
Right.
And we've had people come in that were complaining to us because let's say there was a utility easement on the property, and we had an older woman come in saying, well, they're out there, they're doing all this kind of stuff and things like that. Well, you should have read the title report, because that's exactly what is underground there, and they have the right to do that. So you have this whole mix of all kinds of things going on citywide. So it's a complicated question, it really is, because you don't really know what infrastructure is in place underground, what surface water, mitigation tools are in place? Is it an open ditch? Is it something that somebody privately puts something in the ground? And as the city develops, I think the newer stuff going in is bound to the newer code. That we do have turnarounds and all that stuff is considered. It's the older sections that integrate with that, that I believe becomes problematic over time, or even now.
Right.
We're growing. I mean, we are. Yeah.
That intersection in particular, there was a sidewalk I think they moved and a telephone pole where I was looking at going, what on earth are they thinking here? Because you kind of got to jut off to the side to keep going straight. And that was with the new development that went in. That was not the existing infrastructure that had already been there. So
we were not the cause of that.
But what can we do to keep it from happening again?
Yes, go ahead.
I had just a couple of quick questions. John's last meeting before he left, he had brought up the live, work, live. Oh, she was just saying. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So we can bring that back to the table, kind of what, between John leaving, having Janet Hansen come on and having Hiller come on, there have been different ideas as to what the live work should look like. So I'm not really sure where to take that. So if you would like to see that again, I can bring that back.
Is that what you opened up, so moving from 10 to 50%?
So that live work live is specific to the, so in the CBD, it's a little bit different. So those would be mixed use buildings where you can have commercial and the residential space be separate from one another. Live work is different, where you have the owner of the building both works below and resides in the same structure.
The walk-ups back east.
Yeah, so right now those are allowed in mixed commercial zone. So live work being slightly different.
We felt that it's already in place. You can already do it now.
Yeah.
And some of the discussion came about like looking at a garage that all of a sudden you can turn it into a warehouse. So we're looking at all these different perspectives of what you can and can't do. And I think we finally just said, well, you can already do it now. We didn't see any reason to recodify something that's already in place. That's why we dropped it. It's just one of those things that was already there.
The idea was to create regulations around them, a definition that would be something that we could use to actually regulate them. Because right now, I think that was just something that was missed when it was put in as permitted use in the mixed commercial zone. So there's not a definition. I don't know how to regulate
The CBD.
So it's, how much commercial space and what kind of uses can you have in the commercial space, things like that.
Is it asking too much to have you do some research on that and find out what other cities have done?
I've done a lot of that work already. With how far we got with planning commission.
Bellevue, Kirkland, we looked at. We have a bunch of them. We went down south.
I can bring that back and see if we can.
I was mostly just curious because,
No, I should say we don't have a limit as to how many we can implement in a certain area.
We talked about, it's been a while since I've seen the regulations. I think we did put a cap on how many you could have in a.
Are we talking about live works or work lives now?
Work
lives, okay.
Yeah, so we decided to change it to work live because we wanted to prioritize the work portion of it, right? Residential being kind of the amenity to the commercial part. I remember we put a cap on it, but I can't quite remember if it was based on like the size of the commercial property or if it was like you can have. I have to look and see.
Okay. Right, I was just
So
curious.
we did put a cap.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, I just had one last item. One of the things that I've noticed a lot around like some of the new neighborhoods is for like for school buses, but also for like Skagit Transit or like ride sharing services. Do we want to consider looking at not so much mandated, but suggesting like when you do a new development that you have to do a certain section of it to build in like a stop for Skagit Transit or for bus stops? that
It
something?
depends on the size of the project, and that's specified somewhere, I think it's county code when you need to put those types of stops in. But I think we specified in the UVMU that there needs to be a spot for taxis or Uber or whatever.
Any neighborhood.
Yeah.
Nowadays, for the Ubers and for people driving.
What I was looking at is like BYK's, like the new one that they're putting in, but also like Cambridge Commons. A lot of those, you have lots of cars on the sides. So if someone, bus is going through or like Skagit Transit was going to go on journeys, do we want to consider just like incorporating that into, if there's a big residential unit, that there's a small section dedicated to that activity?
Usually,
Want to mention that projects do trigger
as
setup. I have to send to Skagit Transit, and oftentimes if they find it necessary to put a bus stop in, they'll do that. So with Ms. Peterson's, she just got her rezone approved, and so she's applied for long plat. I sent out the SEPA notice. They would like to see a bus stop there. So I take note of those comments.
Okay.
Put them into the plan.
that was going to be my comment. If I could interject, as part of the subdivision. As part of the subdivision review process, typically a notice will go out to the local transit provider as to whether they have any particular location that they want to provide, that they want the subdivision to provide for transit access. And if they do, then usually incorporate that into the conditions of approval. That the final plans show a transit stop at a particular place.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
If there's not anything else, I see it's 7:40. We have a couple more items on our list. I think though did you want to do the ER&R with the Planning Commission, or is this something just for the council?
It's really
Yeah,
I don't know if it's necessary.
it's up to the planning commission if they want to be a part of that, but it's definitely not planning. You could leave.
So yes, I just wanted to say that I wanted to give you permission that if you would like to go or need to go, certainly feel free. Thank you so much again for joining us, doing this every 6 months. We appreciate everything you do. You are, unspoken heroes. You're people who spend a lot of time actually help shaping this city, and you're the people who make council look good. So I just want you to know that. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you.
And you're more than welcome to stay if you want to stay. That's not don't want to push you out, but. And for the record, I just want to make it for the record, Commissioner Patrick Huggins was here for the meeting, just so that it's recorded.
Did you guys start at 6:30 or 7?
That's
6. At 6? Why I had it down, I thought it was the normal city council time. Sorry about that.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Ready?
Yeah.
So Fund 501. Did I not give you one?
No, but I have a copy for yeah, the one I gave you. Yeah.
Fund 501 is our equipment replacement fund. So we use this fund for two main purposes. Equipment replacement, which is basically like a savings account for the other funds for buying vehicles and equipment. And then we also use it for maintenance and operations costs for managing our fleet. I guess if you want to call you to do that one. Pretty please. Okay. I will just run them around for them.
The vacuum too.
Oh,
yeah, he's right there.
Oh, so we've begun doing a more detailed tracking of revenues and expenditures in the fund. The table on that first page is just documenting all of the departments or areas, the revenues they have contributed to the fund, and the expenditures, so the vehicle and equipment purchased from that fund and the ending balance as of June of 2023. We've also allocated a portion that was put in there and labeled under public safety, allocated that to police and fire, and then what our expected balances are at the end of the year with the monthly revenue that goes into those funds. So that's just a little bit of background about what this fund is and how we use it. So ideally, we would fund I'll just call it, there's like a bunch of different names you can call it, but just short way to say it is the ER&R fund, is that you would buy a piece of equipment and immediately start saving for its replacement. If the asset costs 1.5 million, like a fire truck might cost, and it lasts 15 years, divide what you think it's going to cost in 15 years by 15, and that's how much the fire department or the general fund should put into the ER&R fund every year. And then we would, as part of our budget process every year, we would update how much we think that's going to cost. We've had to do that a lot quite frequently, is update the costs of what we think vehicles are going to be, especially vehicles that far out, but even vehicles 2 and 3 years out, we've had to drastically increase what we think it is going to cost to purchase those items when we need to replace them, which means that the general fund or the other funds that are going to benefit from those assets need to put in more money into that fund. So the ideal model is all along the way, you would be putting money into that fund for every single asset. And that would be funding ER&R at 100%. The impact of funding ER&R at 100% to the 2024 budget is pretty significant. So we did a couple things. We did this kind of analysis to make sure we knew how much money went in from each department and went out from each department. We also updated our costs, how much we think equipment is going to be, and made sure we had everything that should be in ER&R fund, or realistically at this time, there could be a much more things added, but realistically at this time, made sure we had everything in there. So the impact if we funded it 100% would mean we have to significantly increase the contributions to that fund every year. So the table, well, it's on page 2, but also page 7 of the whole packet, shows the difference of what we've been funding it in 2023 from our general fund.
Pat, I'm sorry, your phone? Very sorry, Kelly.
That's all right. What we have been funding from the general fund, so from police, fire, EMS, and there's a small administrative items. You can see we funded at $724, almost $725,000 every year goes to the ER&R fund to fund those vehicle purchases and equipment purchases. If we funded it 100%, we would need in 2024 to put almost $1.3 million from the general fund into ER&R, which is a pretty large increase. And really, with that additional increase, we actually already have a shortfall in our ER&R fund for public safety as a whole, about $564,000. And again, that's using the ideal model, funding ER&R 100%. So thinking about how we're going to fund ER&R in the future is something we have been talking about a lot and trying to brainstorm how we can get as close as we can to the ideal model, funding ER&R 100%, while also maintaining a good financial position in our general fund, because that's also important. So if we decided to fund 100%, there would be significant impacts to the 2024 budget, and we project right now that we would have a deficit of over $800,000 in the general fund, among other factors. So that's not the only factor, but one of the contributing factors would be funding ER&R. We've done a lot of stuff with the budget so far. The numbers that are included in this document are funding ER&R at 100%, so that included in there. The city doesn't have a formal HR position, so our budget numbers include adding an HR manager position. Part of that HR manager position would get recovered in our indirect cost allocation. So all the services that are like citywide services that serve many different functions in the city, the cost of those get allocated out, and part of those get recovered by the utilities. So, but they're 2 years behind. So we use actual numbers from the last full fiscal year. So in 2026, if we hired an HR manager, we would begin recouping our 2024 expenses. So there's a bit of a delay in recouping some of those costs. So the general fund wouldn't have to absorb the full cost of some of the new positions where we have in the proposed 2024 budget. We've also added in here the allocation for a lead mechanic and a mechanic into Fund 501. So the impact to the general fund, it does take a hit to the general fund. We talked about this a little bit earlier during the committee meeting, that it would probably not have as big of an impact as we have currently in the budget, because we need to take out some of the costs that we pay to go out to other shops for our mechanic work, although that wouldn't limit it completely. And then we have some one-time costs for retirement and planned overlaps of staff, knowing that those are infrequent costs. So that's kind of a big, quick, and dirty version of what we're facing for the 2024 budget, and how ER&R funding impacts the 2024 budget. And there's a lot more detail in the writing. If you have any questions about any of the specific items, please let me know. I'm happy to walk through any of those ones. But we wanted to get to what we think are some of the potential strategies to closing that gap. These are not the only strategies. We'll definitely need a combination of these items to close the gap, and only are presenting 2 options below just for simplicity. There may be other combinations of things to do. We're also not done with the 2024 budget. We're still working through that process. So like I said, we have an over $800,000 deficit right now in the 2024 budget. The tables on this page 8, that includes 100% funded ER&R. So when we're looking at that number, that's included. So possible ways we could close that gap is use kind of the remaining amount of the council's strategic reserve that is available, which in 2024 would be about $200,000. We could use ARPA funding. We have about $300,000 set aside for economic development. A portion of that has already been spent, and then another portion is set aside for the community development grant portion. The remaining portion, about $144,000, could be reallocated to the general fund for 2024. The city can also increase utility taxes on our own utilities. So sewer, stormwater, and garbage. And which is, the next one is something we'll likely have to do, regardless of the other sources, is not fund our ER&R fund at 100%. So I've talked to some other cities about this. A lot of cities are in financial positions where they're unable to fund their ER&R fund at 100%. The only, in the group that I talked with, the only place that did was Skagit County. They're in just a different situation, financial situation than the city. And then the final thing is we can use fund balance. So the money we have sitting for cash flow and reserve at the end of fiscal year 2023, we can use our fund balance to cover some of the costs, especially the one-time costs, like retirements, planned overlaps, or any shortfalls in with the HR manager position and collecting the money, the delays in getting from the indirect cost allocation. So I know that was a lot of information all at once. It's kind of all laid out in this document, but is there any questions?
What was the 2023 allocation for the ER&R funds?
I don't have the numbers for all of the funds because the other public safety, so police and fire are two of the big ones, but also solid waste with the garbage trucks and maybe a little bit sewer. I don't know if there's a whole lot in sewer. I have the numbers here for public safety, so what came, or the general fund. So 2023, it was, we contributed $724,900 to ER&R in 2023.
Kelly?
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
All right, I'm just curious because we have a budget that you guys worked on really extensively in 2022, and it was pretty tight. We knew that it was tight, but what we're looking for now is to deplete the strategic council reserves completely, and then also increase on taxes as an option. It goes into a savings account, so it's still into another savings account, and if emergencies hit, of course, the city could probably grab from that. But I mean, what happens in 2025? We're depleting. I mean, we just made a rather large payment out of the council reserves for a needed cost, and now we're going to deplete that. And we stopped funding it in 2022, if you guys remember correctly. We're not using it, so we're going to take it out. So we didn't. The council, didn't apply that money to benefit the city, and now we're using it to pay bills on a budget that's exploding beyond what we had. And I don't know what the plan is for 2025 if those are all gone. We can't keep raising taxes, and the ARPA will be gone too. That's just the ER&R fund, right? So that's a 2% increase on the budget, pretty much, because we're taking in what, $32 million a year as a city, something like that.
I don't have the number in front of me, but it's like 11 million in the general fund.
Okay. And so 11 million from the general, 34-ish from the entire city for all taxes, but it goes into different areas. And we're putting 1 million into this, or 100,000, and it adds up to 2 more, right? So we add in that 820, so it's around just under $1 million. So 8% more? I mean, what's the plan for 2025, I guess?
We're really just trying to tackle, 2 years at a time.
So you're gonna
solve
deplete
the
everything we've
problem.
got.
Yeah, it's
It's-
challenging. I know, that's
it's
why I'm
challenging.
saying,
It's a big
it's a big challenge, and that's why there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. We're not advocating for one way or the other, we're just showing you the numbers. This is where we're at.
Is there a way we can raise a red flag up and say, okay, if we're at a point where we're looking at this year, taking the discussion for wiping out all of strategic planning, all that stuff, we need to reevaluate and pull back a lot of extra spending and start building up a savings at this point. Because if this is what it looks like this year, next year is not going to be better according to the economic forecast. And we're not going to have these funds. ARPA's not going to be there. Strategic planning will be gone.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting old and grumpy, but I find our spending patterns very irresponsible if we're draining all our funds and reserve funds and stuff. We could be finishing the park at Memorial, by putting a picnic area up. We could finish off some projects before we go out looking for new good things to do. So anyway, that's my opinion. And I just think our spending is becoming very irresponsible.
Is there somewhere specific?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty specific, let's drain 199,000 out of this, and I don't know what mechanics go for, but $167,000 a year, new HR position, 158,000 a year, or 56, whatever. It's, it seems like our wishes are big and our realities are smaller. So that's my spin.
I think
Okay.
our realities are big too. The city has expenses, yes, but we've also grown exponentially. And there's been other things that have been added to the city by both the state and the county for certain projects that happen. We're being told, mandated to do certain things. For example, the fish passages, what do you call culverts.
Yeah.
That was put onto the city, actually onto everybody, but no funding to come with it. So that was money that we had to come up with. Also, as we're all painfully aware, we're in a recession, which we just have prices that are just off the chart, and that's been going on for a couple years now.
You don't think the population is suffering the same thing?
I hear you. I'm just saying that the city is also experiencing that.
Mm-hmm.
We have not been irresponsible in our spending. I can assure you that. There's things that we're not even putting out to you that we would like to do because there isn't funding to even look at it. I think if you're going to point finger, you may well point finger to all those council members for the last 15 years who never did the 1% tax increase, which you wouldn't have had to do that every year because it does grow exponentially. But there are things, it's not just the here and now.
Yeah.
There are things that have brought us to this place, and here we are. And Kelly has worked with the staff, with the team, to come up with the best kind of options that we can put forth here. The ER&R, had been fully funded till we started receiving, vehicles are 2-3 times the price they were 2 years ago. So this is what we're looking at. We're trying to do the best we can in the environment, the economic environment we're living in.
I'm not attacking I'm just saying it seems like the policy is irresponsible, of draining all these funds out, everybody's got their own priorities and you deal with them every day. I don't, but I'm just saying the general population is going through suffering too.
Absolutely they
And
are.
if you say the city is, we can raise taxes again, utility taxes, or raise this,
Well, I think you noticed.
and, it's
that's
just
under number 2.
punishing people for fulfilling your wishes, I guess,
Well, it's not fulfilling our wishes, it's fulfilling our needs. It's having to replace vehicles. We have to replace vehicles. Of course, we could do what Chuck suggested, is just give everybody e-bikes. We could send our firemen out on e-bikes with hoses.
Fix the batteries. You know how batteries are made?
Yeah,
Horrific. Horrific. You really need
I
to do
mean,
something
so
about that.
anyway, yes,
I've been driving my truck for 19 years,
I mean,
okay?
yeah, well, my husband's been driving his for 19 years. Yeah, so anyway, it's just, and looking at this, 3% utilities, I don't want that either. I don't want that. And I don't even want to have to take that, I didn't even want to have to bring it before all of you, let alone something that we may have to take before the public. But I think we're just trying to do the best that we can to meet the needs of the city. We're not asking for more of what we have. We're just saying we have to replace these. We have to. And we even have, there's RCWs that talk about how long you can use these vehicles. And we can have Dan come forth, and actually Heather, who put it together brilliantly, show you how the cars, the police cars, the miles grow on them exponentially because of the work that they're doing, because of the protection that we are paying them with our tax dollars to provide for us. So I understand the frustration here. When I first saw this too, I looked at it and I hung my head. But we all have to embrace this. This is the world we're living in. And I guess what we're asking for here is your wisdom, and do you see another way out of this? And if you do, please share it with us. Just go ahead, yes, go ahead.
Well, okay, so if I'm looking at this, and what we need and what we want, perhaps maybe we can only afford one mechanic and not a lead and a mechanic, although we want both, we can only afford one. The HR position estimated at that price, I don't know what the prices look like, but maybe we can hire at will for what we need just to get us through this hard time, and not a continuous employee. Like taxing people is just not an option that we're going to be able to do. And draining our council's strategic reserve. I see putting it towards the general fund in one way. However, when it's gone, and we cannot rely on these one-time things to fix it. What's 2025 going to look like? And we need to be really smart in, maybe making cuts from the top down. You've got to look at all options. So,
okay, thank you. Yes.
I have to get my gig in.
Just a moment. Okay.
You go, Chuck.
The recycle program, for instance, is costing the city $300,000 a year for that thing to operate. And it's doing a little bit to help the environment, but the majority goes in the garbage anymore. Things like this, that's why you end up with a deficit. It's costing a lot of money. I've harassed these people here for a long time, and they try to convince me it's going to cost more to get rid of that. And, well, maybe it will in the short term, but in the long term, it won't. And those trucks could have been put on the garbage route, and the employees, there'd been no loss of employees. And, you wouldn't have to buy a new garbage truck. To me, the city is to blame for all this. And a lot of it is in such things as that, poor operations. And I don't know how it got in this mess, if it is a mess, because it should have been all set up in the budget, to cover things like this. I don't have any answers, but But when I see things like that, $300,000 is a lot of money. Before the recycle program, we had dumpsters down in a recycle yard. I worked there for 7, 8 years, and people were real faithful of bringing their recycle stuff down and put what was recyclable in those containers. And it was a free service for the people. It cost a little bit for a truck to haul the dumpster out, you know, to the recycle and dump it, but it worked fine. But I don't know. I don't know. I agree with the lady over here that I don't want to stick my hands in the public's pocket, because there ain't much left in a lot of people's pocket. We're gonna have to cut something. You're gonna have to work out something that people with the pencils here you're gonna have to take care of this problem in some way besides raising taxes on people. I just can't go through that. But anyway, it's something that has to be taken care of one way or the other. So.
Just regarding the utility fund.
Yeah.
The utilities are enterprise funds, so we're required to run them generally. I mean, they still are part of our government as standalone businesses. So the garbage fund, it runs as a standalone business that can pay into the services that the general government pays. So it pays for processing payroll and the city council and, you know, all those things, but we cannot take money from the utility, from the garbage and recycling services we provide, and use them for our general fund. The only way you can use money from any of the utilities is if you tax the utility. Like the city taxes the PUD, cable, other things. It's a lesser, that doesn't bring in a huge amount of money for us, but just like we tax other utilities, you can tax our own utilities and use that tax money for the general fund. You cannot use any other utility money for general fund purposes. We cannot use any money that was put in by the utilities into the ER&R fund for purchasing general fund equipment. We cannot use that money for buying fire trucks or police cars or any of those items. So just wanted to, I know we talked about at the strategic committee, breaking that down more clearly for committees and council members. So, you know, giving a little heads up.
I know in the past, the city has taken money from the sewer department. They borrowed money from the sewer department.
Oh yeah, we had to pay that back.
Well, supposedly, but I haven't seen where they paid it back yet.
Oh, you did pay it back. Yeah.
But there's ways that you can work things without.
And we're open to the suggestions for how to do
And
that.
there's programs that can be streamlined to operate better, more efficient, cheaper. There's just ways to do that. I know I have to do things like that in my house. And so I won't, can't yet, I just go some other direction and get by. It's a tough thing, I know that. But it all boils down to operations.
All right, so Mr. McCoffin?
Good. I just had a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
So kind of going off of what has been discussed already, is like, are we looking at doing some short-term fix, or are we trying to fix this problem for a longer term? Because I'm trying to piece together in my head what we're looking at, because it seems like at the core of it, we're trying to make sure that our ER&R is funded at 100%. That's a goal we're trying to get to, right?
That is a very long-term goal.
Okay.
That's a very long-term goal.
So when we're like looking at a strategic decision, we want to get to that. It might not be this year, like the next 5 years, but we want to start working like, policy-wise. That's what we want to get to, right?
Right.
That's in the best interest of the city, for those major assets to have full replacement savings.
Okay.
When they come up for replacement. And ideally to be replacing those on a schedule that makes the most financial sense for the city. In other words, vehicles at some point, the mileage starts going down, the maintenance costs go up. And there are optimal times to replace things. So ideally to hit the mark on that.
And we're hitting that a lot, as the lieutenant and police chief have discussed with us. We're hitting that a lot with our police vehicles that were the maintenance costs for not replacing those vehicles, even in a 5-year time period, cannot be, doesn't financially make sense instead of making a new purchase early on.
And I've always supported doing that. I think financially, long term, that's the way we need to start doing business. But that means that we need to start also prioritizing that over other things. Like when we're doing our budget for the next couple, say like the 2-year pieces, we need to make sure that that 100% is priority like 2 or 3. And some of these other things that we've previously like said, hey, we need to fund this before we fund this. I'd like to start seeing that too, because I think that's going to help us long term. So if there's some, cut that we have to make in order to get there, I would be 100% supportive of that. I know we're, cutting it left and right, but I think it's for the long-term success of, operating these fleets, we need to prioritize them budget-wise. Looking at the different options, I'm with everyone. I think the tax option number 2 is kind of off the table because we're going to the public with the firefighter levy, and I would much rather that be the topic of discussion, not, hey, you're doing it 3% and now you're doing this. Like, people are already hurting, so I think we need to just focus on non-tax options would be my input. And there was one option that I didn't know if it's even an option, so I wanted to ask. We have that investment fund, right? That's earning like 0.001% per year. It's got like a couple million in it.
Yeah, it's in the stock. Debbie put it in before she left.
We do have investments. We don't have like investments held in specific funds, so we just have a big pool of money. We just have a big pool of money that we invest in different places. So we have some in bonds and other investments. We have some in the local government investment pool, and then we have some in cash.
So for those people, are that what you're saying?
So what I'm trying to say is like we're getting eaten alive by inflation on those funds. We're actually losing tax. That's all taxpayer money that was put in, right? The surplus years. Is that correct?
The largest portion of our funds is in LGIP. I don't have the numbers with me right now, but it's probably between $11 and $14 million in LGIP. And it actually has a really good interest rate, better than some of our most recent investment purchases earlier in the year. So back in like 2020 and 2021, we did make some investment purchases, which we would probably lose money if we pulled out now because they haven't matured yet. But they have very low interest rates, like less than 1%. But that's a really small portion. In the last couple of years, we've invested in things that have 4% interest rates. And then the biggest chunk of our money is in LGIP, which interest rates fluctuate every day and every month in LGIP. Right now, they're still up. They're in the 5+%. So the things we already have locked in, it's difficult to move that money. And LGIP is really getting where we have the bulk of our money. is making the most interest for us. We're making significantly more investment interest than we had anticipated in previous years. But you can't, that money, it's not like we're setting it aside somewhere and we can pull from it. That's all being taken into consideration here. Also, a big pot of that money is the utilities money. The utilities have reserves. I think, I'm not going to be quoting these numbers exactly, but like the sewer reserve fund probably has between, I'm not going to quote this right, like $3 and $5 million in it. But those are specifically set aside. We can only use that money on utilities. And it's set aside for when down the road we have to make a $17-20 million expenditure for a new wastewater treatment building plant. Mark would say that better than me, but so that money isn't really just sitting there waiting to be used. We have it, but we need it for long-term sustainability for the city.
And it couldn't be used on the general fund.
And it couldn't be used.
Which is really where we have the police and fire.
What's caused this deficit?
Yeah.
Well, this number here includes the increases to the ER&R fund, which is about, I think it's $565,000. So primarily from the significant increases we've seen in the price of vehicles. You know, how much new fire trucks cost, how much the command rigs for the assistant fire chiefs, those have, I don't know, maybe doubled or at least gone up by 50%. So
You didn't know that when you balanced the budget?
When we balance
Is this something, yeah,
It's going up
is
tremendously.
this something that occurred after the budget?
Yeah, we did the budget in 22, Chuck. In 23, we had 10% inflation. And that was just the average kind of nationwide on certain things. That wasn't vehicles. That inflation was higher.
So just for clarity, what exactly is currently funding this?
currently funding ER&R is the contributions that have been made over time from the general fund. And this is specific, I mean, what we're talking about today is the general fund's portion of that money, not the utility funds. So it's generally been looked at as one big pot of money that the other funds contribute into that, and then we pay out. What we did this year is did an analysis to make sure that we weren't using utility money to pay for our fire and police. So after we did this big analysis, that's kind of when we're determining actually the general fund needs to be contributing more, or the general fund's portion of the ER&R fund will go negative.
Or,
Yeah.
yeah, if I don't mind, but I
Go
think.
ahead.
So I was wondering, so to understand the money that's invested in the stocks, 11 million, that is actually allocated in certain areas. So it's not like there's a pool of money that we can actually grab from. So that's not included in anything, because pretty much it's a zero balance. The budget is basically what we have with our savings included. From my understanding, that's correct, right?
So every single fund has an ending cash balance right now. The total of all those ending cash balances equals the total amount of cash investments, LGIP, that we have. So it isn't like this money right here, it goes to this fund. So the general fund, I think, and again, I don't have the ending cash balance of the general fund in front of me, but I think the general fund has between $2 and like $2.6 million in there. But that also has to sustain us over ebbs and flows. So, you know, we talk about property tax is a big revenue stream for the general fund, those come in big spikes. So people owe their property tax in April. So we get a spike there in October. So we get a spike there, but our general fund cash balance has to sustain us through
Yeah, so
that valley.
I was saying, like, basically all of that is allocated. With our strategic fund for the council, if we deplete that, there will be nothing for the council to have. Basically freedom in the committees. We would run it all through executive branch, through budget requisitions and things like that to get approval. So our hands would be tied in many ways when we deplete that, and we would be, which we kind of are in a little bit of ways, holding to the executive branch and like, here's this or that, when the strategic fund was actually designed for the council to spend not out of the general budget, but out of the strategic fund upon things the council saw would be needed for the city as representatives of the people. So that will be gone. And it's pretty much already very smaller than it was when I came in. So it's been depleted and it doesn't look like it's going to get replenished. You know, and with the fire department levy, if that goes through, that's great. If not, we're going to be in a serious pinch where we're like, okay, well, are we taking loans? We'll have to be looking at layoffs. I mean, these are real questions. When I look at my budget at home, if I'm deficit, I have to project outward. And so if I'm looking outward and I'm saying, okay, this is 2024, 2025, we knew inflation was up in 2022. We knew it was going to go up, or we projected that up, and all the economists said it. And so in that, I think a large amount of people were actually voicing that when we had certain things coming through. Well, are we setting things aside? The inflation's going to go up. Are we sure we want to get this? A street sweeper, which we needed these things, but we knew that we were going to be in something. We're not too far in. I'm just cautioning everybody, 2025, 2026, we can follow the same model that was set forth by our economic, office, and it's not changed. The trajectory is pretty much on par with what they forecasted. So we're not looking better for coming up. If we lose these funds, it'll be damaging to the council for our freedom to be able to support the city, but then also we're not going to be in a good position. So those are real conversations to have. I mean, the sizing of staff. As the city starts to see that, companies start to see that, every area start downsizing, that's going to affect the whole bottom thing. So some way we've got to go back through this and kind of reevaluate where we are. I just want to raise that red flag because we just raised costs on the garbages. It wasn't tax, I don't think. We actually raised the cost on those, and then we raised tax.
Cost simply to cover the services.
The services that go back to the city. So garbages are almost a tax on the citizen. It raised all those rates. My rates went up. I was like, oh man, I voted for that. Then we just raised rates on utilities to support. We raised rates on what we could on property tax, which I do agree. If we would have started doing that, we would have had the compound interest. It did financially make sense. But we put in the tax on the homeless situation, grab some from the city. We're really putting a lot on the citizens, and we're doing good as an economy within our local macro area. But we're feeling the effects from the economy. I just want to point that out. Like, we should look at things like that and have some serious conversations about that coming forward. Because how big is the staff? How many vehicles? All that. There's everything spent in our investments, like you said. And we're looking at spending what little we have in the bank. That would cause me alarm at home.
I'm going to piggyback off that a little bit too, because why are we hiring new employees if we knew that this was coming, and bringing new ones on, thinking about that as well? And is this the only thing that's in the red, or how are the different departments looking? Because they want employees as well. Are their departments doing well, or are they in the red too?
The vast majority of, well, what we're looking at right now is the general fund. So the general fund has a huge number of employees. So specifically the fire and police are our biggest source of employees. We also have engineering, building and planning are all in the general fund. We have other funds, so parks and facilities, that's it's a separate fund, but it has all the same revenue sources as the general fund. So it could even be, it's basically like a side to the general fund. So it's kind of wrapped up in this as well. Then we have some other lesser funds that have very specific purposes that have restricted revenue sources and expenditure sources as well. Those ones aren't as impacted as the general fund by these issues. And then of course we have our utility funds, which right now are not struggling like our general fund is, because they rely on revenue from providing a service. So those ones are not struggling like the general fund. The general fund is our biggest concern.
If we look at the departments as a whole, then I'm not sure which are divided out of it. So would you say like the majority of them are in the red, or are they good? Where are those, what would they look like?
None of the departments have specific revenue sources. So like, well, the fire department has a couple of specific revenue sources. They get money from, we get money from the county, from the EMS levy. And we get some money from insurance and GEMT and a couple other sources. So like fire has some specific revenue sources that I don't know the percentages, it doesn't cover even 50% of what fire's expenditures are. So they rely on revenue from the general fund, property tax, sales tax, utility taxes are the big ones. They rely more than 50% on the general fund to pay. Police has zero revenue. We don't make, there's no specific revenue tied to the police. The police are just funded from the general fund, property tax, sales tax, utility tax. Building and planning and engineering, there are some specific things for them, but they're pretty minor. You know, we don't bring in a significant amount of money in permitting, although we do bring in money from there. But it likely doesn't cover the cost of engineering and building and planning. So again, it's covered by property tax. So nothing is really, departments aren't really broken out individually in that way, because they all have the majority same funding source, except the utilities, who are funded from service fees.
Well, I'd like to throw my 2 cents in here. A 3% utility tax increase, I can't do. We're over 10% right now. I think that coverage already been rated a couple of times in the past. As far as the council reserve, the ARPA, these are obviously not something we can regenerate funds. So I don't see how that's going to help us long-term in rating them. It gives us a real short-term fix to a big cost increase for vehicles. I'm in the automotive industry. I see the price go up. I get it. I completely get it. I see the parts, all of it has gone up. I see how a mechanic will probably save us a reasonably large amount of money because of the markups of those parts. We already have the facility, which is the most expensive portion of that. But I'm looking at this difference between 2023 and 2024 allocation. If we worked off the same number for 2023, which I know is not realistic long-term, we end up with a deficit of $250,000 roughly in your total budget from what you're showing. And if there's investments that are actually available for the general fund that we would be able to pull from when they mature, is that a possibility? Could we get a report on what funds there are that would be eligible to go to the general when they mature? Because you were talking about how there'd be a loss if we pulled them out prematurely, but you know, are they 2-year, 4-year investment? And then I know that that's something that we would deplete as well. But costs on these vehicles cannot continue to rise at the rate that they are. It's just not feasible for anybody to purchase them. Everybody will just start keeping their cars for 50 years like with Cuba. So I'm curious if there's things like that that we might be able to rate for the very short term, or at least stop putting them in a long-term investment so that if we come up needing that fire truck or that group of police cars, we can pull from it because it's in a savings account instead of a long-term investment. And then obviously you end up tightening the belt a little bit and cutting things you don't want to cut from the budget, which I understand, but I do at home as well right now because costs have gone up.
So the general fund can't just take money from an investment. So the general fund has, like I said, I don't know, $2+ million in it. And it's not like this money right here. Like, it's not like the general fund money is in our checking account. We have $2 million in the general fund, and that's all the cash that the general fund has. That's all the cash the general fund has access to. And right now, it's not like the money we have in investments is holding us back. We have sufficient cash flow in our checking account. We can pay our bills. We get money in there. There's no cash flow problem with the city. Like I said, we have a majority of our investments in LGIP, which only takes a day or two to move money from LGIP, which is a really great investment because it makes great interest, although it can change at any time, any day, it can change, but it makes great interest and we can pull money from it within 2 days, 2-3 days, business days. So we can't really take money from investments because that money is already considered in the big pot of our money. And all the money that's not in the general fund is already accounted for in all of our other funds. That makes sense.
Okay, so you're accounting for those investments, the amount of money you have in investment in your budget. You're not. I'm probably missing something here.
So we do get investment income from those investments, and it has significantly gone up. So we're accounting for the interest we expect to see the additional money from investments in all of our budgets. So there's $2 million in the general fund. There's $5 million in the sewer reserve fund. There's $1 million in the sewer fund. There's $200,000 in the garbage fund cash that pays the expenditures for all of those funds, and all that money pooled together is in one big pot in our checking account, in our investments, in our LJP. There's no specific pointing to like, here's the investment money, we can pull that down and use it.
Okay, I think I was misunderstanding. I was thinking that was money that was set aside. This is just our investment. We're holding on to this for a rainy day. It's not included in the.
If we had a fund that was like a rainy day fund and money would be put into that account or put into that fund, that would be different, but we don't have a rainy day fund.
Well, maybe we want to create that.
Well, if we had extra money, we would.
Part of the analysis here too has simply been to go through the ER&R fund in great detail, thanks to Kelly's work, to try to figure out which pieces that are general fund and which pieces that are specific to different departments. And so the result of that analysis is that the general fund deficit got bigger. So it's not as if, and yes, we have inflation and other things going on, but that's just part of the story. The other part of the story is we're trying to make sure we're doing this absolutely right. And getting to that truth, we're discovering that, unfortunately, which seems to happen in cities far too often, the general fund comes out on the losing end. And so now we're trying to figure out how to solve that problem.
Does this deficit include all the labor negotiations we did over the last year that had really big jumps in?
That's another factor that shifted since we
That
passed the
was
budget originally. Yes, and that was inflation driven, quite a bit of that.
And that's where I significantly have a very difficult time even considering any sort of increase in utility tax. Working for a private company, we had 9 people in our office. We now have 4.5 people doing 9 people's jobs. Not a single person got a pay increase. We're just happy to still have jobs and trying to survive. And so watching the cities continually try to increase in taxes, like I 100% realize the costs of everything are going up, but in the real world of the people in our community is that most people didn't see that increase, don't see these increases, and they're facing harder times. And we're looking at having a couple more hard years in the fiscal forecast. And so I don't think that Nick is wrong in his thought process of, you know, what's going to happen in 2025 in depleting some of these funds, and how do we do that? And so one of the things that I did specifically ask for, and that will come up in a strategic planning meeting, is a complete overview of how the funds are situated for each department, where that revenue comes from, and how it is spent in the future. So we will have a meeting specifically going over that so that everybody becomes clear about that. And it will likely be something that happens in January since we'll have 3 new council members. But I'm sure the 3 of you sitting here would love to come to that meeting. And so you can link to us. But I think that having that in front of us will be clear moving, you know, more clear moving forward in addressing issues like this. And so, you know, just trying to look at where the stuff is coming from. And so we have a decrease in business revenue coming in for sales tax and that sorts of stuff. I don't know what that looks like this year in comparison to a couple of years in the past, right? The cost of goods have gone up, sales tax has increased, but what kind of flexibility, where has that changed, and what has actually been allocated and brought into that stuff? Because we don't have a lot of super strong businesses bringing in those tax dollars to fund the departments that we need to fund and to fund the general fund, which goes into this. And so that's where our huge struggle is. And so this economic development and, you know, looking at it from the fiscal side is incredibly important. I understand beautifying, right? But at the end of the day, if we don't bring in the dollars and the cash flow, beautifying means nothing. So we need to, you know, start thinking more fiscally in long term, and then we can get to a point where we can do more of the fun stuff. But right now it's hard stuff, and it's not fun, and it's not good to look at this stuff, but it's where we're at.
Is this including a 1% tax rate increase? This 2020, is this what we're looking at? If we did get that, would you, is that these options with that or without it?
I believe it's without it. Considering the levy lid lift, although we don't have the numbers in the 2024. I have to go back and check what we did. As if we approved, or if the voters approved the levy lid lift. So this is kind of doing 2 things: not putting in the amount we would get for the levy lid lift, not putting in the additional firefighter EMTs, but also assuming that we will get that money and that we wouldn't then be asking the voters for 1% on top of that. I'm not even sure how you would calculate all that out and get it pushed out to the county in time. So I don't believe we included the 1% in there. Although the 1% to the general fund is probably less than $30,000 or about $30,000.
At this point, it would have to build up. So on the, like 2 years ago when I first got in here, our strategic planning fund was, or the council strategic reserve, that was like a rainy day fund or investment. It really wasn't allocated anywhere. And that's kind of gone the way of the dodo. it seems like that's, I know it's hard, but we should look at maybe redoing that, because that was something that council had in our strength to say, okay, well, yeah, we've reached this challenge with the city. Here's where we've got, and we can come in. And that's kind of a check and balance with the citizens that have representatives for them, is that you guys have some funds in case something might go astray or things might go up or money might not be handled greatly, then you guys can come in and kind of help, just soften things. So we should definitely have that in consideration. I know that we canceled that, but I think that that was something that maybe in hindsight, looking at it, that the citizens placed in the hands of the council for this very purpose. That would be great. I don't know if the levy doesn't go through, what position will we be in?
They can't hire them.
They can't hire him, and then they're saying that then they'll be coming back, like gas prices going up. Leo would be back here saying, I've got to do the rates again. I just foresee it.
They do the rates every year. Yeah, so just heads up.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with the ARPA being used. It was one-time use of federal funds or taxpayers' dollars somewhere, right? So, it should go to reduce this and take the stress off the taxpayers in one way or another. That came out of everybody's pocket at some place.
Well, the Fed's not printing and sending millions of dollars to all the cities anymore either, which the cities couldn't spend fast enough.
Got the answer. You fire everybody that's not under the union and hire them back at that price.
There you go. With your e-bikes.
Set up.
Okay, so
Can I
everybody
get you
feel
back for that?
comfortable, got your questions answered, you have information to kind of chew on?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good then, move on? Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Good questions, good discussion. Thank you, everybody. Okay, last item of the night, we're going on 9 o'clock. The last item of the night is the city council meetings, and Charlie, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I know Star TV just turned off, so that's probably a sign as well. Yeah, so this item is on the agenda. It was at Councilmember Lavacca's request, Mayor, and so we've put it on here. And I really want to turn it over to Councilmember Lavacca to kind of talk about his thought process and how it's here. I will add that the council governance manual is included with this item. So that would be a place, that's kind of how you organize your meetings, and that would be a place if you wanted to make changes to work.
So that's something, I know we are late on time, and we were thinking that this would be a kind of a workshop meeting, or I was thinking it would be a workshop meeting. That's why I proposed it to Charlie to be able to have a discussion. And part of that is like in our council meetings together, sometimes I'll feel like things are getting contentious, right? Things are getting a little bit more heated than they probably need to be. And I just wanted to voice that without being in an official council meeting and say, hey, this is probably going a little bit more intense than I would like when I'm just trying to ask questions. Because it feels like I've got to kind of not be able to be freely expressing what my thoughts are during the council. So within reason of Robert's rules and within reason of council governance. So that was something that I wanted to see if anybody else kind of felt on. I had thrown a suggestion in the council committee meetings, or in a committee meeting we had. And so I want to look at the committees as a second. So there's kind of three things on here. The committees are something where I feel like everybody has an ability to kind of weigh in and hear policy, see policy, change policy. But since I've been on the council, it seems like it's favored. And I don't feel like there's fair, equal, equitable time produced to each committee, to each member. And I feel that that could be perceived maybe in a way that it probably isn't or isn't at all, but it's perceived, at least from the public or myself, as kind of an unfair situation. So equal time is not divided with Charlie or the mayor, but mainly Charlie amongst the committee members on task or things to be done. It's pretty centralized into one individual. No offense or anything at all, but it's not equally distributed. If people have comments or ideas, there's not the same follow-up that there is with one direct individual. So I think that that's kind of an unfair treatment within the committees. And if there's a way for us to say there should be a balance of time, because the committees should be nonpartisan, they should be equally yoked, they should be equally divided at the same time. We're yoked and we're divided. So the time that the city produces into the committees and the council should be equally divided and not centralized into one individual. So I don't know if that is something we can look at. It's something that's made me uncomfortable in the committees, or when I look back on areas of the committees that like product we put forth, ideas we put forth, suggestions we put forth, and how much of that was grabbed. It was one individual. And so after that, and it's just the way it is. No offense on that individual, but it is one of those things where it should be divided, and we shouldn't have an appearance of favoritism or an appearance of hopes of elevating in a position of election or something like that. So it wasn't coming out right during the time. So I don't think that we've seen much changes. In our last meeting in the committee, we talked about the strategic or the economic development funds actually spending the other 140. So we spent the 140 on the grant, we grabbed a hold of that, we started running with that with one individual, but then we had an immediate conversation about spending the rest, but it's not being evenly distributed between the committees as far as time and opportunity to put those out. The last thing I would just want to ask the committee or the council to consider is seeing if it's all right if we can possibly get rid of the salary commission. I don't think they've done their job that we anticipated them to do when we were advised that the salary commission would be a wise way to go. I don't think that they did a full analysis upon the cost of city council and mayors throughout the cities and weighed it upon fact and analytic data. I think it was something where they were calling up, do you even want it? And we should go this way. And their logic didn't seem to be factually based. So I don't think the intent was there. I'm fine not getting a raise if that's the case, but it hasn't been something where I've gotten the analytic data to say, here's what councils throughout are paid. This is what you should get paid. This is what the mayor should be paid. This is what this is. Instead, it's a bit emotional. It's a bit of what I feel. And to find out that many of them don't live in the city is something where they're making a decision like, oh, let's give the council $10,000 a month on other people's dime. So I don't know if that's right. So I would almost say, cancel it, bring it back if we even have the ability to put that forth in a motion and get second on it, and then come back and say, okay, if we want a raise, we've got to vote on it again and hear it from the community that we don't want to have you guys get a raise if you're not doing your job. Where's our strategic fund we entrusted you with? It's gone. We're not going to give you more money. That would be a better approach in my mind. So those were the three things I was just hoping to have a quick discussion on. I know we don't have a lot of time, but so I just rambled.
Still a meeting, it's off.
The TV just turned on.
Yeah, mine's still on my screen.
I think it's still.
The meeting's still going.
Yeah.
TV is just timed out after, so that's the way to scoot us out. There's going to be somebody with the vacuum cleaner at our
It's the thing that-
Well, is it broadcast?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's still recording. Or it's still.
Yeah, just the things that Lavaca did now, it's the things we used to do in our retreat. We could say what we wanted to say and say things that we could make things better, what we could make everything smoother for the council and with no hard feelings and let it all come out. And that's what a retreat is for. It's for the council. And I enjoyed those things. I could say what I want to say. I could call him a dirty, you know what, or whatever I wanted to. And there's no hard feelings. And it works. It works. I agree with you, man. I could say a lot of things. I think a lot of things. The council has changed so much since I first came into office. It used to be a pleasure and fun to come down here to the council, and they took care of business. That's our job, is to make policy. And it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot. Thank God I'm leaving here pretty soon. I hope we get some good people in. It won't take much to replace me, but I hope we have some good people and council comes, gels back together and be a council. It's been a pleasure. I'll give my departing speech in the
Plan for a 3 hour.
After you're done.
Thank you, Nick.
Madam Mayor, I thank you for, I would like to, number one, express, I'm sorry if you felt picked on, Kelly. You're the messenger, So anyway, you were taking a lot of hard questions tonight, and I felt like we were being grilled quite a bit, but you are the financial guru. So anyway, thank you for handling it so well and for your tolerance, okay? And now come through with some brilliant ideas on how to get us out of this mess.
Thank you.
With the open discussion, I would actually have to say that I agree with everything that Nick has brought forward, on all points. There's been opportunities provided and other council members not even advised of or aware of. One of the reasons why I wanted funding to be completely open and available to everybody, because there are projects that were brought forward by various council members over the last several years that were basically quashed, and come to find out there actually is funding available for things. So I don't know if it's because it was just something that wasn't of interest to the people in the room, or if it was just because nobody wanted to deal with it. I don't know, because that's not my place, but it's very interesting dynamic. I can't pinpoint any necessary specific reason, but I can say I can see where that comes, where that perception can come from. I'm actually also not opposed to quashing the commission, salary commission panel. I was one person that received a phone call, and I found it very interesting. And then to not have it, the results posted or any minutes posted or anything brought up forward in transparency to the public, I found that to be very, it looks very shady, and I fully believe in transparency. There's not a specific agenda or dates or anything set up on where when those meetings would happen. And so I think if that's going to be something that is there can be a committee at some point, but I think those procedures need to be tightened so that everybody has their taxpayers' dollars being used to pay for this. And any raises or increases, and it needs to be, all finances need to be transparent, and the minutes need to be up and all of that. And so I fully agree with that as well.
I appreciate Nick bringing this forward. I think this is really important discussion, so that we as a council, can be on the same page. Because I've been in those meetings too, where it's like, I'm okay having that discussion now. Like, I'd rather go another 30 minutes, but like flesh this idea out. And I feel like sometimes when things do get contentious, like let's have it out. It's okay. That's what a public meeting is supposed to be. Like, the council's not always going to agree, and like we might have some run-ins with staff that we're asking these questions because like we all honestly want to know. And it might seem like it's a little bit off base, but maybe we're seeing things from a different perspective, and we're coming at a point that we're trying to get to, and if we get cut off, we don't get that resolution that I think we could have. And I think all of us would be okay staying longer to have these discussions, and even if it kind of floats a little bit left and right from the topic, I'm okay with that. I think as long as the end result is everyone feels like they had a chance to get their point out and have that discussion with each other. For me, that's the important part, that we walk away from the meeting feeling like we were heard, that we were able to represent our constituents. And I know like that's been a point of frustration, is like you don't get to fully say what you wanted to say. And so I would be supportive of that. I personally think we should keep the salary commission for a couple of reasons. When I was coming onto council, the city council before us passed bumping it to $900 a month per council member, despite a huge outcry from the public. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that gave public comments saying, don't do it, don't do it. They still voted for it. I don't think that from a policy perspective, the council should have the authority to set their own salary, because it could be abused, and they have, apart from the mayor vetoing it and having one vote, prevented it from being overridden, it would have been passed. So I think with our council, maybe it wouldn't pass like a raise. Like I think most of us are against it. But we have to think about it for the next 4 or 5 or 10 councils, that might not be the case for those members. And I think we can definitely give that feedback, like, hey, it needs to be more analytical. We want to see why you guys make these decisions. I'm on board with that 100%, but I think we need to keep that decision policy with a group outside of.
I think you're really brave, and I appreciate you for bringing that up, Nick, or Councilman Walker. And I agree with everybody has said wholeheartedly. And I do think that Chuck had a very brilliant idea, or excuse me, Councilman, about for that very thing that let's give it to the voters. Let's let them decide. Let's put it on the ballot when it comes up. Do you want to give the council a raise? Do you not want to give them a raise? And take it out of the, I don't really like it in the commission, salary commission. I think that the voters would be heard. We either get it or we wouldn't, and it would make them happy because they got what they wanted. So that would be my 2 cents for that.
Councilman McGoffin, I'll just echo most of what he said. As far as meetings, I think everybody should get a chance to ask questions, be heard. That's what we're here for. We're representing different chunks of people in our communities, and we should make sure that we get all of our questions answered and our opinions are heard, and we feel comfortable with the things that we're voting on or doing. I think that's deeply important. The Salary Commission, definitely would like to see it done a little differently. I don't want control over my own salary as a council member. I don't want to leave the council when I'm no longer on it with that as an option for the next person. I don't think government officials should be in control of their own salaries at all. It's just not something I like to see. So as far as the way the Salary Commission's being run right now, I would like to see some changes. I would like to see more transparency. I think that is always a good thing with government, as much light as possible on how things are done, why the choices are made. And I would prefer it be people who have stake in the game, living in the city. I know that sometimes it's difficult to get enough people who are willing and able, but I would really prefer it be people who are going to end up paying for those increases if they're going to be voting for it. That's something that I would have written in if I'd thought about it, as well as the meeting announcements and solid minutes or video, preferably. Those are things I'd like to see. Thank you for bringing it up and telling us how you feel as well. I appreciate that, Councilman Mabaka. I think we should all feel comfortable with doing it.
So my understanding of the Salary Commission is that I know the minutes were disseminated, and also it's on our YouTube, so you can watch the meetings on YouTube. It's like you can watch all the other meetings on YouTube.
We did hear your feedback from the previous meeting. So we held one at the end of August, and we posted it as a public meeting. It was virtual, just because we needed to ensure that there was attendance. So it was a virtual meeting. We posted it as a public virtual meeting. We made a packet for it, including all the information we provided the commission. We sent the full council the packet. We posted it on the website. There's a video of it also available on the website. There's a specific page for the Citizen Salary Commission. And then at is the next meeting the 13th? At the September 13th meeting, we'll provide the minutes. All the minutes are posted on the website. So if there's something more that the council would like to see, we're open to that. At this time, we don't have a specific schedule on like the council schedule for next year. But we always post it in on the calendar. So if there's something additional to the Citizen Salary Commission you would like to see regarding transparency,
which calendar?
It's on the main.
So it's not on
city
like the
website.
meeting calendar when you go to government.
It's not on the schedule. It's not on the schedule we print at the beginning of the year. Because the meetings are
They
not.
weren't originally scheduled.
So what would be the challenge with putting that before the voters? Because I think the salary commission had a long time. And I think that it was a beta test. I think that they called and asked some pretty peculiar questions that didn't make any sense. I like the idea that nobody should have the right of their pay. It's kind of gotten in that way inadvertently. The mayor chooses the commission and then the commission, and it was just inadvertently, but they decide the wages and the bonuses and things like that.
You said to okay it though. I mean.
We okay the commission. We didn't okay the other so they don't bring it back for, it's all within them. So yes, we okayed the commission. And that's why I'm saying right now, we should probably pull it back and then put it before the voters or find another way to put it before the voters. If another council in time wants to bring a vote to it, they can deal with the citizens at that point and have a mayor that vetoes it or puts that final vote in, or it goes through and gets people upset. But that should be before the representatives that are voted in, or if we can set a precedence to get that onto a ballot or a format that says a $200 a month raise because we do this, we've saved here. We were gonna do the salary review for 98,000. We pulled it back and got it down to 20. We saved 60,000 here. If we can justify an increase, that works. Put it before them. If they deny it, great. But I think, in my personal opinion, that, and then with the time allocated by the city, because it's city resources that the council is working with, it should be allocated equally. So personal time is personal time, hang out, whichever. But if it's city time to do events or to go lobbying or to get, prepped or influenced into election or seats or things like that, then that should be, or committee things that come from the committee, such as grant proposals or anything that go forward, it should be equal time to each council member. And we've got to figure out a way to establish that so we don't have an abundance of time placed on one individual, because that does give a negative appearance of favoritism. And I don't think that's very appreciated by the citizens, and it doesn't help the council work in ebb and flow. So those are two things that I would suggest we look at figuring out a way to do. And yeah, we might have to mothball the commission. We gave it a try. Things didn't work out the way that we thought it would. It came about because Glenn was asking for, hey, I'm not even on the council next time, but they need a raise. They haven't seen it in 20 years. And it was a promise that it'll be done. And then it was like, let's do a commission. And then the commission went astray-ish,
Is that something we can bring to the agenda and then take a look at and make a look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, we're gonna need to fill up and do some research. I don't know the answer to the question about taking it to the voters, like what that looks like or how feasible that would be, or how often, there are a variety of questions because elections do have a cost to them as well, to think about there. So we would want to do more research. We can certainly bring you back more information and have a conversation and maybe get some direction on where you want to go.
Would I be able to put a motion forward just to have it put forth on the agenda for us to re-vote on that? And then if the council wants to vote on it on the next session, then we keep it on. And if we don't, we don't. And I think we would need a second for that to get on the agenda, if that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you would want
So
to do that. It's a motion and a second to put it on the agenda to talk about it at the next council meeting and decide if you want to spend staff resources and other things to actually.
So we wouldn't be able to put a motion forward to end it. That's what I would put a motion for right now, is to get it on the agenda at the next council meeting to see if the council would be in favor of ending the commission.
To talk about it.
To end it.
To actually have the action on that.
To take the action to move away from that commission and then come out with a formulated structure plan to say, here's a new commission. This is what that would look like. And these are the criteria for the commission or the people that would be on that committee. And then this is kind of what that would look like.
If a majority of you want to go there, I mean, certainly do that. I will say the turnaround time is tight because that council packet needs to be done tomorrow.
Okay. Maybe
so, that's really tough.
Maybe the following one.
That would be better. Yeah.
That would be my motion for it. If
I second. Just one moment here. I think Glenn.
Go.
Go ahead, Glenn.
I'm just gonna move for adjournment after the mayor's final comments. So anyway.
It's a long night.
So go ahead.
I just was seconding his motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adjourn and we
No,
are.
no, 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 no,
Oh,
no.
I
A
see.
motion for his, for the,
Salary
For the salary
commission to be
commission?
put
All
on
right,
the
thank
agenda.
Okay.
I mean, it'd be helpful if you actually got a motion in a second. You
So-
actually voted on it, so
So
if you want to
Nick
have
has
on
made a
the
motion.
agenda as an action item.
Councilman Lavaca has made a motion to put the salary commission on the agenda to have discussion as to whether or not to continue with it or to disband it.
Okay.
And the second was made by Councilwoman Kesty. All those in favor?
Aye.
And post same sign. Okay, good deal. All right,
Madam Mayor,
And
after
yes.
your final comments, I would, ask if we could be adjourned.
I'm with you. Yes. No objection?
But you
We're
get
adjourned.
comment, you get comment.
Have a good night.
I appreciate you guys' time on that last one.
I was so great. I was gonna bring up the other one. And I was like, no, we're out tonight.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, this is, I don't know why. Grocery store. Somebody calls 911.
Check on her.
We have 3 cars, you have to take that fire, then you have to, you have a police officer.